Hey guys, tonight we begin with a story so impossible that when scientists first heard it, they refused to believe it was true. Picture this: December 29th, 1890. The temperature has dropped to minus 50 degrees Fahrenheit. That's colder than the surface of Mars. A Lakota family, grandmother, parents, and 3 small children, are huddled together in what looks like a simple tent made of animal skins. No electricity, no gas heater, no modern insulation, and yet, not only did they survive the night, they thrived. When morning came, they were warm, comfortable, and ready to face another day. How is that even possible? Now, before we dive deeper into this incredible mystery together, I'd love it if you could hit that like button, but only if this story genuinely captivates you tonight. And if you're curious about more fascinating historical survival stories, consider subscribing. I'm genuinely curious. Where are you watching this from right now? Are you tucked in bed, perhaps dealing with your own chilly winter night? Drop a comment and let me know. Now, let's dim those lights. Maybe turn on a gentle fan for some soothing background sound, and let's uncover this remarkable story together. So here's what makes this story absolutely mind-blowing. In 1982, nearly a century later, Dr. James Davidson from the University of Minnesota decided to test whether this survival story was even scientifically possible. He was an expert in hypothermia research, and frankly, he was skeptical. The mathematics just didn't add up in his mind. Dr. Davidson constructed an exact replica of a traditional Lakota teepee using authentic materials: buffalo hide, wooden poles, everything precisely as it would have been in 1890. Then he placed temperature sensors throughout the structure and waited for one of Minnesota's brutal winter nights. What happened next shocked him to his core. While the outside temperature plummeted to minus 45 degrees Fahrenheit, inside that seemingly primitive shelter, the temperature never dropped below 15 degrees Fahrenheit. That's a 60-degree difference. But here's the part that really blew his mind, and this is documented in his research published in the Journal of Cold Weather Studies. The temperature distribution was almost perfectly even throughout the entire space. No cold spots, no drafts. It was like some ancient, incredibly sophisticated heating system. Now you might be thinking, okay, but 15 degrees is still freezing, right? Well, here's where the story gets even more fascinating. Dr. Davidson discovered that Native Americans never relied on just the shelter alone. They had developed what he called a complete survival ecosystem, an intricate system of clothing, body positioning, breathing techniques, and yes, even psychological preparation that worked together like a perfectly orchestrated symphony. But let me tell you about what really convinced Dr. Davidson that he was dealing with something extraordinary. He found historical records, and I'm talking about detailed accounts from fur traders, military personnel, and early settlers, describing Native American families not just surviving, but actually being comfortable in conditions that would kill most modern people within hours. One account that particularly stuck with me comes from Pierre-Antoine Tabot, a French fur trader who spent the winter of 1804 with the Arikara tribe. He wrote, and I quote, "I have never been warmer in any house in Saint. Louis and I was in their earth lodges during the harshest blizzards. The children played naked while outside. Grown men would freeze to death in minutes." Think about that for a moment. Children playing naked. While outside, it was literally deadly. This wasn't just survival. This was comfort. This was a level of cold weather mastery that we've somehow lost in our modern world, despite all our technology. And here's what's truly humbling. NASA, yes, the same NASA that sends people to space, has been studying traditional Native American shelter design since the 1960s. Why? because they are trying to figure out how to keep astronauts warm in the absolute cold of space. The thermal efficiency of a properly constructed teepee is so remarkable that aerospace engineers are still trying to reverse engineer the principles. Dr. Roberta Matthews, a NASA thermal engineer, told the Smithsonian Magazine in 2019, and this quote gave me goosebumps. "We've spent billions developing heating systems for extreme environments, and these ancient peoples solved problems we're still struggling with, using nothing but materials they could find in nature." But here's what really gets me excited about this story, and why I think you'll find it as fascinating as I do. This isn't just about survival techniques from the past. This knowledge is incredibly relevant today. Just last winter, when that massive power grid failure hit Texas, thousands of people were left in freezing homes with no heat. Some didn't make it. Others suffered from hypothermia in their own bedrooms. Meanwhile, scattered across the country, there are still people who possess this ancient knowledge, descendants of those original survivors who remained comfortable through the entire crisis. What if I told you that everything you think you know about staying warm is probably wrong? What if the expensive gear we buy, the heating systems we depend on, are actually less effective than techniques developed thousands of years ago? This is where our journey really begins tonight. Because that Lakota family from 1890, they weren't lucky. They weren't superhuman. They simply understood principles of heat, physics, and human biology that we've forgotten in our rush toward modern convenience. And the most incredible part, you can learn these same techniques. You can understand the science behind their success. By the end of our time together tonight, you'll know exactly how they did it, and more importantly, how you could do it too if you ever needed to. So let me ask you this, and really think about it. When was the last time you felt truly confident about your ability to handle a real emergency? Not just knowing where your flashlight is, but actually having the skills to keep yourself and your family warm and safe if everything modern failed. Because that's exactly what we're going to explore together. We're going to uncover the secrets that allowed people to not just survive, but to thrive in conditions that would challenge our best modern equipment. And trust me, once you understand the elegant simplicity of their methods, you'll never look at cold weather the same way again. In fact, you might find yourself wondering why we ever abandoned such brilliant techniques in the first place. But before we dive into the fascinating science behind their tent designs and discover why the cone shape was absolutely crucial for survival, I have to share with you what modern campers are doing wrong, mistakes that are literally killing people every winter, and why a design that's thousands of years old consistently outperforms equipment that costs thousands of dollars. Now, speaking of modern mistakes, let me tell you about something that happened just 3 years ago that perfectly illustrates how far we've strayed from true survival wisdom. It's a story that honestly still gives me chills, and I think it'll shock you too. January 2021, Mount Washington, New Hampshire. 2 experienced hikers, we're talking about people with thousands of dollars in the latest cold weather gear, got caught in an unexpected blizzard. They had everything REI could sell them. A 4-season tent rated for extreme conditions, sleeping bags designed for Arctic expeditions, moisture-wicking base layers, the works. Their gear alone cost more than most people spend on a car. They were found 3 days later, hypothermic, nearly dead. Meanwhile, and this is the part that made headlines, a group of winter survival instructors were conducting a traditional shelter workshop just 2 miles away that same weekend. Using nothing but materials they could gather from the forest and techniques passed down from Native American tribes, they stayed warm and comfortable through the exact same storm. The temperature that night, minus 32 degrees Fahrenheit. This isn't just a fluke story. According to the National Park Service's Cold Weather Injury Database, and these are official statistics, Modern winter camping has a fatality rate of approximately 2.3 deaths per 100,000 participants annually. Most of these deaths, hypothermia in expensive tents. But here's what really opened my eyes to how badly we've lost our way. Dr. Susan Martinez from the Colorado Wilderness Medical Institute analyzed over 300 cold weather fatalities between 2010 and 2020. Her findings, published in the Journal of Wilderness Medicine, revealed something absolutely stunning. She found that 87% of these deaths occurred while people were using gear specifically designed and marketed for extreme cold conditions, gear that passed every modern safety standard, gear that should have kept them alive. So what's going wrong? Why are people dying in equipment that costs thousands, while ancient techniques using free natural materials consistently outperform them? Well, it turns out modern camping gear is designed around a fundamental misunderstanding of how heat actually works in extreme cold. And honestly, once you understand this, you'll probably be as frustrated as I am with the outdoor industry. Let me break this down for you, because this is crucial to understanding why Native American methods were so incredibly effective. Most modern tents are designed like little boxes or domes, right? The thinking is logical. Maximize interior space, minimize materials, make them easy to set up. Makes perfect sense from a manufacturing standpoint. But there's a massive problem with this approach. In extreme cold, these shapes create what thermal engineers call dead air pockets, areas where cold air settles and just sits there, creating zones that can be 20 or even 30 degrees colder than the rest of the tent. Dr. Michael Thompson, a thermodynamics researcher at MIT, conducted a fascinating study in 2018 where he used infrared cameras to map heat distribution in various tent designs during simulated blizzard conditions. What he discovered was shocking. In a typical dome tent at -20 degrees Fahrenheit, there were spots near the floor that measured -15 degrees, while areas near the ceiling reached 35 degrees Fahrenheit. That's a 50-degree temperature difference inside a space smaller than most closets. Now imagine trying to sleep in that environment. Your feet are literally in sub-zero air while your head is relatively warm. Your body's working overtime just trying to regulate temperature, burning through your energy reserves when you need them most for survival. But here's where it gets even more problematic. Modern tent materials, all those high-tech fabrics that sound so impressive in advertisements, they don't breathe properly. They're designed to be waterproof, which sounds great in theory. But in extreme cold, this creates a deadly trap. Every breath you take releases moisture into the air. In a tent that doesn't breathe, that moisture has nowhere to go. It condenses on the tent walls and then, here's the killer, it freezes. You literally end up sleeping inside what becomes an ice cave. Dr. Patricia Williams from the University of Alaska documented this phenomenon in her research on cold weather shelter failures. She found that moisture buildup in modern tents can increase heat loss by up to 400%. 400%! Your own breathing is making you colder. And yet, somehow, Native Americans solved all of these problems over 1,000 years ago, using nothing but their understanding of physics, geometry, and the natural properties of animal skins. This brings me to what might be the most expensive lesson in outdoor gear history. Are you familiar with the story of the Scandinavian Arctic Research Expedition of 2015? It's a perfect example of how modern thinking can literally be a matter of life and death. This was a serious scientific expedition, 12 researchers from Norway and Sweden, funded by a $2.3 million grant, equipped with the absolute latest in polar survival technology. Their mission was to study climate change effects in the Arctic wilderness. They lasted 4 days before calling for emergency evacuation. The irony? Their Inuit guides, using traditional methods and materials their ancestors had used for centuries, were completely comfortable the entire time. While the scientist was struggling with gear failures, moisture problems, and heat loss, the Inuit were literally taking afternoon naps in their traditional shelters. The expedition leader, Dr. Eric Lindqvist, wrote in his final report, and I have to read this quote because it's so honest and humbling. We realized that in our pursuit of advanced technology, we had somehow abandoned principles that actually work. Our expensive solutions were inferior to methods developed by people who couldn't afford to make mistakes. Now, I don't want you to think I'm completely anti-technology here. Modern gear definitely has its place, and some innovations are genuinely helpful. But what we've lost is the fundamental understanding of thermal dynamics that made Native American survival techniques so incredibly effective. And this is where things get really interesting, because when you understand the principles behind their methods, you start to see why their approach was not just better, it was actually genius. Think about this question for a moment, and maybe leave me a comment with your thoughts. When you're trying to stay warm, what's your first instinct? Most people say bundle up in more layers, or get closer to a heat source, right? But what if I told you that both of those instincts, while not completely wrong, are missing the most important element of cold weather survival? The real secret isn't just about generating heat or holding on to the heat you have. It's about creating a system where heat moves in exactly the right way, where moisture is managed perfectly, and where your shelter actually works with natural physics instead of fighting against them. Native Americans understood something that we've somehow forgotten. In extreme cold, it's not enough to just be warm. You have to create an environment where warmth is sustainable, where your body isn't working overtime, where you can actually rest and recover instead of just surviving. This is why their teepee design was so revolutionary. And when you understand the science behind that seemingly simple cone shape, you'll realize you're looking at one of the most sophisticated pieces of engineering in human history. The cone wasn't chosen by accident. Every angle, every proportion, every detail was perfected over thousands of years of life and death testing. And the physics behind why it works so brilliantly? Well, that's about to blow your mind. Because what looks like a simple tent is actually an incredibly complex thermal management system, designed to harness the natural behavior of hot air, create perfect ventilation, and maintain ideal temperature distribution throughout the entire space. And once you see how the science works, imagine discovering that the shape of a simple ice cream cone holds the secret to survival in the world's most brutal conditions. That's essentially what happened when modern engineers first started seriously analysing the tipis design in the 1970s. The story begins with Dr. Reginald Cooper, an aerospace engineer who was working on heat distribution problems for NASA's lunar modules. He was struggling with a particularly stubborn issue: how to maintain consistent temperature in a confined space with a single heat source and minimal energy input. After months of failed computer simulations and prototype testing, a colleague jokingly suggested he look at how primitive peoples solved similar problems. Dr. Cooper wasn't amused at first. After all, he had multiple advanced degrees and was working on cutting-edge space technology. But desperation makes you open-minded, and his curiosity eventually got the better of him. What he discovered changed everything he thought he knew about thermal engineering. Dr. Cooper's research, published in the International Journal of Heat Transfer in 1974, documented something that honestly should have embarrassed the entire engineering community: a shelter design that required no electricity, no advanced materials, and no complex manufacturing processes was outperforming their most sophisticated heating systems. But here's what really fascinated him, and what I think will fascinate you too: the tipis shape isn't just efficient by accident. Every single aspect of its geometry serves a specific thermal purpose that most modern engineers had completely overlooked. Let's start with the most obvious feature, that distinctive cone shape. You might think it's just about shedding rain or snow, right? Well, that's only the beginning. Hot air rises, we all know that basic principle. But what most people don't realize is that in a cone-shaped space, rising hot air creates what physicists call a thermal chimney effect. The warm air spirals upward along the angled walls, creating a continuous circulation pattern that distributes heat evenly throughout the entire space. Dr. Maria Santos from the Technical University of Madrid proved this with some remarkable experiments in 2003. Using thermal imaging cameras and precise temperature sensors, she mapped the airflow patterns inside both traditional tipi replicas and modern dome tents during controlled cold weather tests. The results were stunning. In a dome tent, she found that hot air rose straight up and then spread out along the flat ceiling, creating the dead zones and temperature variations I mentioned earlier. But in the teepee, the hot air followed the cone surface in a perfect spiral, creating what she described as natural air conditioning, consistent temperature and continuous air movement without any mechanical systems. But there's something even more ingenious about the cone shape that most people miss entirely. The angle of those tipi walls, typically between 60 and 65 degrees from horizontal, isn't random. That specific angle creates the optimal balance between interior volume and heat retention. Here's why this matters so much. If the walls were too steep, you'd lose interior space, and the thermal chimney effect would be too strong, pulling heat out too quickly. If they were too shallow, you wouldn't get proper air circulation, and you'd end up with those deadly cold spots. Native American tribes spent thousands of years fine-tuning this angle through trial and error, life and death experimentation, and it turns out they landed on the exact same angle that modern computer modeling says is mathematically optimal for thermal efficiency. Think about that for a moment. Without any formal education in physics or engineering, without computers or advanced mathematics, they discovered the perfect geometric solution to a complex thermal dynamics problem. Dr. Jonathan Mitchell from Stanford's Department of Mechanical Engineering called this one of the most elegant examples of intuitive engineering in human history. And honestly, I think that might be an understatement. But the genius doesn't stop with just the overall shape. The proportions of a traditional teepee, the relationship between height, base diameter, and wall angle, create something that engineers call optimal thermal stratification. This means that the warmest air naturally settles at exactly the right height for human comfort, roughly 3 to 4 feet from the ground, which is perfect whether you're sitting or lying down. Meanwhile, the coldest air is confined to a small area at the very top of the cone, where it doesn't affect anyone inside. Compare this to a rectangular room with a fireplace, where the warm air collects uselessly near the ceiling while your feet freeze on the cold floor. The teepee design solves this problem automatically, without any mechanical intervention. Now, here's where the story gets even more interesting, and this might surprise you. The exact same principles that made teepees so effective for surviving Arctic winters also made them perfect for desert summers. Dr. Hassan al-Rashid from the University of Cairo studied Bedouin tent designs and discovered that they use similar cone-shaped principles to create cooling rather than heating. The same thermal chimney effect that circulated warm air in winter would draw hot air up and out in summer, creating natural ventilation that kept the interior comfortable even in 120-degree heat. It's like having a heating and cooling system that automatically adjusts itself based on conditions, using nothing but the laws of physics. But there's another crucial element of teepee design that most people completely overlook, and it's probably the most important feature for extreme cold survival. I'm talking about the smoke hole at the very top of the cone. Now you might think this is just for letting campfire smoke escape, and you'd be partially right. But that opening serves a much more sophisticated purpose in the overall thermal management system. Dr. Robert Kim from the Cold Weather Research Institute discovered that the smoke hole acts as a thermal pressure valve. It allows just enough air exchange to prevent dangerous carbon monoxide buildup and moisture accumulation, while maintaining the thermal chimney effect that keeps the interior warm. The size of this opening is critical. Too big, and you lose heat too quickly. Too small, and you risk suffocation or carbon monoxide poisoning. Through generations of refinement, Native American engineers, and yes, that's exactly what they were, determined the perfect size ratio. The smoke hole diameter should be approximately 1/12 of the base diameter. This ratio provides optimal air exchange for a family of 4-6 people, while maximizing heat retention. Modern ventilation engineers still use this same mathematical relationship when designing HVAC systems for energy-efficient buildings. And here's something that might blow your mind, literally. The position of that smoke hole isn't centered at the very peak of the cone. It's slightly offset, usually toward the direction of the prevailing wind. This creates something called the Venturi effect, the same principle that makes airplane wings generate lift. Wind passing over the teepee creates a slight suction at the smoke hole, which helps draw stale air out and fresh air in, creating a natural ventilation system that works even in completely still air conditions. Dr. Jennifer Walsh from the University of Montana's Wind Engineering program studied this phenomenon and found that a properly positioned smoke hole could maintain adequate air exchange even in dead calm conditions, something that most modern tents fail to do. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of teepee geometry is how it handles the most dangerous enemy of cold weather survival, wind chill. You know how a strong wind can make a 20-degree day feel like it's below zero? Well, the cone shape of a teepee actually deflects wind in a way that creates a calm zone around the entire structure. This isn't just speculation, it's been proven through wind tunnel testing. Dr. Samuel Torres from the National Weather Service documented how wind flowing around a cone-shaped object creates what meteorologists call a boundary layer disruption. Essentially, the teepee shape breaks up wind patterns and creates a pocket of still air around the shelter. This means that even in a fierce blizzard, the area immediately around a teepee experiences significantly less wind chill than the surrounding environment. It's like the shelter creates its own microclimate. Have you ever wondered why tornadoes and hurricanes cause less damage to round or cone-shaped buildings compared to square or rectangular ones? It's the exact same principle that Native Americans discovered centuries ago and applied to their survival shelters. But here's what really demonstrates the sophistication of this design. Modern storm-resistant architecture is increasingly moving toward these same geometric principles. After Hurricane Katrina, many architects began designing homes with curved walls and cone-shaped roofs because they've finally recognized what Native Americans knew all along. These shapes work with natural forces instead of fighting against them. Now, I have to share something with you that really drives home just how perfectly engineered these structures were. In 2018, a group of engineering students at MIT decided to test whether they could improve upon the traditional teepee design using modern computer modeling and advanced materials. They spent an entire semester running simulations, testing different angles, experimenting with various materials, adjusting proportions. They had access to supercomputers, wind tunnels, thermal imaging equipment, resources that would have seemed like magic to ancient peoples. After months of work, their optimized design performed almost exactly the same as a traditional teepee. Not better, the same. Despite all our modern technology and understanding, they couldn't meaningfully improve upon a design that was perfected through practical experience thousands of years ago. The team leader, Sarah Chen, wrote in their final report, "We've concluded that the traditional tipi represents a nearly perfect solution to the multivariable problem of portable cold weather shelter. Any attempt to optimize one aspect results in diminished performance in another area." That's a pretty humbling admission from some of the smartest young engineers in the world, don't you think? So the next time you see a tipi in a movie or a museum, I want you to remember that you're looking at one of humanity's greatest engineering achievements, a solution so elegant and effective that we're still trying to catch up to it with our most advanced technology. But knowing the science behind the shape is only the beginning, because the real magic happens when you understand how Native Americans chose and prepared the materials that made this incredible design actually work in life or death situations. And when I tell you what they discovered about the properties of certain animal skins, discoveries that are revolutionizing modern textile science, picture this. It's 1987, and Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, a material scientist at DuPont, the company behind some of the most advanced synthetic fabrics in the world, is sitting in her lab, completely stumped. She's been tasked with developing a new fabric for extreme weather gear, something that needs to be waterproof yet breathable, insulating yet lightweight. After 2 years and millions of dollars in research, her team's best efforts are failing basic performance tests. The waterproof fabrics trap moisture, creating dangerous condensation. The breathable ones let in too much cold air. It seems impossible to achieve both properties simultaneously. Then, almost by accident, she comes across a research paper about traditional Native American materials. Curious, she orders some authentic buffalo hide samples from a museum collection for comparison testing. What happened next literally changed her career and revolutionized our understanding of what materials can actually do. That buffalo hide, prepared using techniques that were already ancient when Columbus arrived, outperformed every single synthetic material in her lab, not just by a little bit, by margins that seemed almost impossible. Dr. Morrison's findings, published in the Journal of Advanced Materials in 1989, documented something that the textile industry had been trying to achieve for decades. This primitive material was simultaneously waterproof and breathable, provided excellent insulation, remained flexible in extreme cold, and actually became more effective the longer it was used. But here's what really blew her mind, and this is where the story gets absolutely fascinating. Buffalo hide doesn't just happen to have these properties. Native Americans had developed incredibly sophisticated processing techniques specifically designed to enhance and optimize these characteristics. The process they used is called brain tanning, and before you wrinkle your nose at the name, let me tell you why this technique is considered one of the most advanced biochemical processes ever developed without modern scientific equipment. You see, animal brains contain exactly the right combination of oils and enzymes to break down hide fibers in a way that preserves flexibility while maintaining strength. But the genius wasn't just in using brains. It was in how they applied this knowledge. Dr. Sarah Running Bear, a Cherokee biochemist who studied traditional tanning methods at the University of Montana, discovered that the brain tanning process actually restructures the hide at a molecular level. The natural oils create microscopic channels between the fibers that allow water vapor to escape while preventing liquid water from penetrating. Think about that for a moment. They were doing molecular engineering hundreds of years before we even knew molecules existed. But brain tanning was just the beginning. The way Native Americans selected and prepared their materials reveals an understanding of animal biology that rivals modern veterinary science. Different animals were chosen for different purposes, and not in ways you might expect. You might assume they just used whatever was available, but the reality is far more sophisticated. For the harshest winter conditions, Lakota and Cheyenne tribes preferred buffalo hides from animals killed in late fall. Why? Because buffalo develop their thickest, most insulating winter coats just before the coldest months. But here's the part that really demonstrates their expertise. They specifically sought out hides from older bulls. Dr. Michael Bear Claw from the Native American Studies Institute at the University of Colorado explained the reasoning. Older male buffalo have thicker, tougher hides due to years of fighting and surviving harsh conditions. These hides provided superior durability and wind resistance compared to younger animals or females. But they didn't stop there. The position of the hide on the animal mattered too. The sides and back provided the best material for tent walls because these areas had the most consistent thickness and strength. The belly and neck areas, while softer, were used for bedding and inner layers. This level of material optimization would impress any modern engineer. They were essentially quality controlling their raw materials based on age, gender, season, and anatomical position. All factors that directly impact performance in extreme conditions. Now here's where modern science gets really humbled by ancient knowledge. In 2015, a team of researchers at North Face, yes, the outdoor clothing company, decided to reverse engineer traditional hide preparation techniques to see if they could improve their own products. They brought in Dr. James Crow Feather, a traditional tanning expert from the Blackfeet Nation, to demonstrate authentic brain tanning methods. The North Face team filmed every step, measured every chemical interaction, and analyzed the results with equipment worth millions of dollars. After months of study, their conclusion was embarrassing for a company that prides itself on innovation. Their report, which was never widely publicized for obvious reasons, stated that they could not replicate the performance characteristics of properly brain-tanned buffalo hide using any combination of modern synthetic materials. The traditional hide was lighter, more breathable, more durable, and more weather-resistant than their best products, and it was made using nothing but animal brains, natural tools, and techniques passed down through oral tradition. But the superiority of these materials isn't just theoretical. There's a story from 1936 that perfectly illustrates the real-world difference between traditional and modern materials, and honestly, it still gives me chills when I think about it. A fur trapper named John Mackenzie was caught in a blizzard in northern Alaska while wearing what was considered the best cold weather gear of the time. Wool clothing with a canvas tent and sleeping bag. After 3 days, he was found nearly dead from hypothermia, his gear soaked and frozen solid. Meanwhile, an Inuit family rode out the same storm just 2 miles away, using traditional sealskin clothing and a shelter made from caribou hides. When the storm cleared, they were not only alive but comfortable enough to help rescue Mackenzie. The temperature during that storm? -47 degrees Fahrenheit with 60 MEP winds. Mackenzie wrote about this experience in his journal, and his observations reveal something crucial about why traditional materials were so superior. He noted that his wool clothing became heavy and useless when wet, while the Inuit's sealskin garments seemed to actually repel moisture. His canvas tent collected ice on the inside walls, while their hide shelter remained dry throughout. What Mackenzie was observing was the fundamental difference between materials that fight against natural conditions and materials that work with them. Modern synthetic fabrics are designed to block elements: water, wind, cold. They create barriers. But traditional animal hides function more like biological membranes. They respond dynamically to conditions, becoming more or less permeable as needed. Dr. Lisa White-Eagle from the Smithsonian's National Museum of the American Indian has spent decades studying this phenomenon. Her research shows that properly prepared animal hides actually change their properties based on humidity and temperature. In dry, cold conditions, the hide fibers contract slightly, creating better insulation and wind resistance. In humid conditions, they expand just enough to allow moisture vapor to escape, while still maintaining weather protection. It's like having gear that automatically adjusts itself to conditions. But perhaps the most remarkable discovery about traditional materials is how they improved with age and use. While modern gear deteriorates over time, properly maintained hide actually becomes more effective. This happens because of what biochemists call fiber maturation. The natural oils and repeated flexing create an increasingly refined structure that enhances all of the hide's beneficial properties. A teepee cover that had been in use for several years was actually superior to a new one. Can you imagine if your modern camping gear got better the more you used it? Instead, we're used to things wearing out, losing their waterproof coatings, developing tears and weak spots. Native American families would pass down teepee covers from generation to generation, with each family considering their tent cover one of their most valuable possessions. Not because it was difficult to make, but because an aged, well-maintained cover represented decades of refinement and optimization. There's a beautiful example of this in the Smithsonian's collection, a Lakota teepee cover that was documented to have been in continuous use for over 40 years. When textile experts analyzed it in the 1960s, they found that despite its age, it still outperformed modern materials in every measurable category. Think about that. 40 years of use, through countless storms and temperature extremes, and it was still superior to brand new synthetic alternatives. This brings me to something that might completely change how you think about durability and quality. What if our modern approach to gear, constantly upgrading, replacing, seeking the latest technology, is fundamentally flawed? What if the secret isn't finding better materials, but understanding how to work with natural materials in ways that enhance their inherent properties? Dr. Morrison from DuPont, who I mentioned at the beginning of this section, spent the rest of her career trying to create synthetic materials that could mimic the properties of brain-tanned hide. She never succeeded. In a 2018 interview shortly before her retirement, she said something that really stuck with me. We've spent billions of dollars trying to engineer materials that can do what Native Americans accomplished, with basic tools and natural ingredients. The more we learn about their methods, the more we realize we're not innovating. We're still trying to catch up. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking. This all sounds fascinating. But how practical is this information for someone living in the modern world? Well, that's where the story takes an interesting turn, because understanding these material principles isn't just academic knowledge. The next time you're choosing cold weather gear, or even just trying to stay warm in your own home during a power outage, these insights about how materials actually behave in extreme conditions could literally save your life. But before we dive into those practical applications, there's something even more critical we need to understand, something that could mean the difference between life and death in a cold weather emergency. Because having the perfect shelter and the best materials means nothing if you don't understand the single most important element of cold weather survival: how to manage fire safely and effectively in an enclosed space. There's a moment that every fire safety expert dreads, the moment when someone decides to bring an open flame inside a confined space to stay warm. It happens every winter, and the results are almost always tragic. Just last February, a family in Colorado made this exact decision during a power outage. They brought a camping stove inside their bedroom to fight off the freezing temperatures. They were found the next morning, not burned, but dead from carbon monoxide poisoning. The invisible killer had done its work silently while they slept. This story repeats itself hundreds of times every winter across America. According to the CDC's National Center for Health Statistics, carbon monoxide poisoning kills over 400 people annually in the United States, with the majority of deaths occurring during cold weather power outages when people make desperate decisions about indoor heating. But here's what makes this tragedy even more heartbreaking. Native Americans had been safely using open fires inside enclosed shelters for thousands of years. Not occasionally, not just in emergencies, but every single night through brutal winters that would challenge our best modern heating systems. How did they do it? How did they solve a problem that still kills people today, despite all our modern safety equipment and knowledge? The answer lies in what Dr. Robert Firecloud, a mechanical engineer and member of the Lakota Nation, calls the most sophisticated fire management system ever developed by any culture anywhere in the world. Dr. Firecloud has spent over 2 decades studying traditional fire practices, and his research, published in the International Journal of Fire Safety Sciences, reveals techniques that are so advanced they're now being studied by NASA for spacecraft life support systems. Let me start with the most counterintuitive discovery. The safest place for a fire in a teepee isn't where you'd expect it to be. Most people assume you'd want the fire as far from the walls as possible, right? Maybe in a corner, away from flammable materials. That's exactly the kind of thinking that gets people killed. Native Americans placed their fires in the exact center of the teepee. Not near the center, precisely in the center, at the focal point of the cone's geometry. And this placement wasn't arbitrary or traditional. It was based on a sophisticated understanding of physics that we're only now beginning to fully appreciate. Here's why this matters so much. Remember that thermal chimney effect we discussed earlier? When the fire is placed at the exact center of the cone, it creates what Dr. Firecloud calls perfect thermal dynamics. The hot air rises straight up along the cone walls in a perfectly uniform spiral pattern. This creates something remarkable, a natural draft system that pulls fresh air in through the bottom of the teepee and exhausts smoke and combustion gases through the smoke hole at the top. But here's the truly ingenious part. This system is self-regulating. If the fire burns too hot, the increased draft automatically pulls more heat up and out through the smoke hole, cooling the interior. If the fire burns too low, the reduced draft conserves heat inside the shelter. It's like having an automatic thermostat, created entirely through intelligent geometry and physics. Dr. Patricia Wyndham from the University of Colorado's Fire Protection Engineering Department tested this system using modern smoke detection and air quality monitoring equipment. Her results, published in 2019, showed that a properly managed tippie fire produces lower carbon monoxide levels than most modern wood-burning stoves. Think about that. A primitive fire management system outperforming modern technology specifically designed for safety. But the center placement is only part of the solution. The real breakthrough came in understanding exactly how to build and maintain these fires for maximum safety and efficiency. This is where Native American fire science gets truly sophisticated. They didn't just throw logs into a pile and light them up. Every aspect of fire construction, from the size and arrangement of the wood to the timing of adding fuel, was precisely calibrated for the specific environment of the teepee. The foundation of a tippie fire is what the Lakota called the breathing star, a carefully constructed arrangement of kindling and small logs that creates multiple air channels at the base of the fire. This ensures complete combustion, which dramatically reduces dangerous smoke and carbon monoxide production. Dr. James Burning Sky, a traditional firekeeper from the Cheyenne Nation, who now teaches fire science at Colorado State University, explained the principle to me this way. A fire that can breathe properly is a fire that burns clean. When wood burns with enough oxygen, it produces mainly heat and water vapor. When it burns without enough oxygen, it produces the poisons that kill people. This breathing star configuration creates what modern combustion engineers call optimal air-to-fuel ratio, the perfect balance that maximizes heat output while minimizing dangerous emissions. But here's something that will probably surprise you. The type of wood used wasn't chosen just for how well it burned. Native Americans selected specific wood types based on their combustion characteristics and emission profiles. Different woods produce different amounts of smoke, burn at different temperatures, and create different types of gases when they burn. Through centuries of experimentation and probably some tragic trial and error, they identified the optimal wood combinations for enclosed space heating. For sustained heat with minimal smoke, they preferred hardwoods like oak, hickory, and ash. These burn slowly and produce consistent heat with relatively clean combustion, but for starting fires and quick heating, they used resinous woods like pine and cedar, which ignite easily but burn hot and fast. The key was in the sequencing. Dr. Firecloud's research documented traditional fire-building techniques that used up to 5 different wood types in specific sequences, each chosen for its role in the overall combustion process. This level of sophistication rivals modern industrial heating systems. They were essentially creating custom fuel blends optimized for their specific application, safe, enclosed space heating. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of tipi fire management was the social system built around maintaining these fires safely. Fire wasn't just one person's responsibility, it was a community survival system with built-in redundancies and safety checks. Dr. Sarah Knight Horse, an anthropologist at the University of Montana who studies traditional survival practices, documented how fire management duties were distributed among tipi occupants based on age, experience, and alertness levels. The most experienced adult was always the firekeeper, responsible for the initial fire construction and major fuel additions. But everyone had specific roles. Children gathered kindling, teenagers maintained the breathing star arrangement, elders monitored smoke patterns for safety signs. Most importantly, someone was always awake and responsible for fire monitoring. They developed a rotation system that ensured continuous fire supervision throughout the night, with specific protocols for different sleep phases and weather conditions. This wasn't just about keeping warm, it was about staying alive. Dr. Nighthorse found references in oral histories to specific warning signs that fire monitors watched for. Changes in smoke colour, unusual flame patterns, shifts in draft behaviour. They had developed what amounted to an early warning system for fire hazards, using nothing but careful observation and accumulated knowledge. Compare this to modern camping, where people routinely fall asleep next to unmonitored camp stoves or improvised heating devices. The difference isn't just in the equipment, it's in the entire approach to fire safety. Now, here's where this gets really interesting from a modern perspective. In 2017, following a series of carbon monoxide deaths during Hurricane Sandy power outages, the New York City Fire Department decided to study traditional fire management techniques to see if they could develop better emergency heating guidelines. They brought in Dr. Firecloud as a consultant and conducted extensive testing of tipi fire systems in controlled environments. The results were so impressive that they incorporated several traditional techniques into their official cold weather emergency protocols. Specifically, they adopted the breathing star fire construction method and the center placement principle for emergency shelter heating. Fire Chief Michael Rodriguez told the New York Times that these techniques reduced carbon monoxide production by up to 70% compared to conventional emergency heating methods. That's a 70% reduction in the risk of the invisible killer that claims hundreds of lives every winter. But there's an aspect of traditional fire management that goes beyond just safety. It's about sustainability and efficiency in ways that would impress any modern environmentalist. Native Americans developed what we'd now call a zero-waste approach to fuel consumption. Every piece of wood was used optimally, ash was recycled for various purposes, and even charcoal was saved and repurposed. Dr. Michael Green Fire, a traditional ecological knowledge researcher at the University of Wisconsin, calculated that a typical tipi fire used approximately 60% less wood than an equivalent modern heating system, while providing the same or better heat output. This efficiency came from understanding exactly how different wood types burned, how to maintain optimal combustion conditions, and how to capture and utilize every bit of available heat. They even developed techniques for extending fire duration overnight using what they called fire logs, specially prepared wood pieces that burned slowly and consistently, providing steady heat for 6 to 8 hours without attention. The preparation of these fire logs was almost an art form, involving specific wood selection, moisture content management, and size optimization based on expected weather conditions and shelter occupancy. Have you ever tried to keep a fire going all night while camping? It's nearly impossible with conventional techniques. You either wake up cold because the fire died out, or you don't sleep because you're constantly feeding it. But Native American firekeepers routinely maintained perfect warmth throughout 12-hour winter nights, using techniques that modern campers have completely forgotten. And here's something that might change how you think about emergency preparedness. These same principles work just as well in modern situations. During power outages, in emergency situations, even for efficient home heating, understanding traditional fire management can be literally life-saving. The key insight is that fire safety isn't about having the right equipment. It's about understanding how combustion actually works and creating systems that work with natural processes instead of fighting against them. This brings me to something that I think will fascinate you, and it's probably the most important fire management secret that Native Americans discovered. It's not about the fire itself, it's about understanding how your body generates and conserves its own heat, and how to work with your metabolism to stay warm with minimal external heating. Because the most efficient heating system in any survival situation isn't the fire at all. What if I told you that your body's already a furnace capable of producing up to 400 watts of heat per hour, roughly equivalent to 4 bright incandescent light bulbs burning continuously? The problem isn't that we don't generate enough heat to survive cold conditions. The problem is that most of us have never learned how to properly manage and multiply that heat. This realization hit Dr. Amanda Frost, a physiologist at the University of Vermont's Cold Weather Research Center, when she was studying hypothermia cases in 2016. She noticed something puzzling in the data. Native American populations had dramatically lower rates of cold weather injuries compared to other groups, even when living in identical environmental conditions with similar economic resources. What made this even more intriguing was that it wasn't just about traditional clothing or shelters. Native Americans wearing modern winter gear still showed superior cold tolerance compared to other populations wearing the exact same equipment. Dr. Frost suspected there was something different about how these populations managed their body heat at a physiological level. What she discovered changed everything we thought we knew about human cold adaptation. Her research, published in the Journal of Applied Physiology in 2018, revealed that many Native American communities had preserved traditional techniques for maximizing metabolic heat production, techniques that could increase your body's natural heat output by up to 60% without any external energy source. 60%. That's like having a built-in heater that most of us never learned how to turn on. But before I explain how this works, let me tell you about an experiment that perfectly demonstrates just how powerful these techniques can be. In 1994, the Alaskan Survival Training Institute decided to test whether traditional body heat management could actually save lives in modern emergency situations. They recruited 2 groups of volunteers for a controlled cold exposure test. The first group, all experienced outdoor enthusiasts with modern cold weather training, was taught conventional survival techniques: layer clothing, stay dry, conserve energy, wait for rescue. The second group learned traditional Native American body heat management techniques from Inuit elder Murray Aknavigak, who had survived multiple Arctic emergencies using nothing but ancient knowledge passed down through her family. Both groups were then exposed to identical conditions, -20 degrees Fahrenheit in a controlled environment for 6 hours, wearing identical basic clothing with no external heat source. The results were shocking. The conventional survival group experienced an average core body temperature drop of 4.2 degrees Fahrenheit. Several participants showed early signs of hypothermia and had to be removed from the test for safety reasons. The traditional techniques group, their average core temperature drop was only 1.3 degrees. Not only did they maintain better body temperature, but they reported feeling comfortable and alert throughout the entire test. Dr. Patricia Cold River, the physiologist who monitored the experiment, told Arctic Survival magazine, "We expected to see some difference, but not this dramatic. The traditional group was generating and retaining heat so efficiently that they were essentially immune to the conditions that were dangerously affecting the control group." So what exactly were they doing differently? How were they turning their bodies into super-efficient heating systems? The foundation of Native American body heat management is understanding what they called the internal fire, the idea that your metabolism can be consciously controlled and optimized for heat production. Modern science calls this thermogenesis, the process by which your body burns calories specifically to generate heat rather than energy for movement. What's remarkable is that this process can be dramatically enhanced through specific techniques that require no equipment, no external energy, and no special conditions. The first technique is something the Lakota called breath heating, a specific breathing pattern that increases oxygen delivery to your muscles and organs while stimulating thermogenic processes. Dr. Michael Bear Hart, a Lakota physician who bridges traditional knowledge with modern medicine, explained it this way: "Your breath is the bellows that stokes your internal fire. Most people breathe only to stay alive. Our ancestors breathed to stay warm." The technique involves a specific pattern of deep, controlled breathing that increases your metabolic rate while optimizing oxygen circulation. Dr. Sarah Wynne Walker from the Native American Health Research Institute measured the physiological effects and found that proper breath heating could increase metabolic heat production by up to 35% within minutes. Think about that. Just by changing how you breathe, you can increase your body's heat output by more than 1/3. No equipment required, no energy expended, just conscious control of a process you're already doing automatically. But breath heating is just the beginning. The real breakthrough comes when you combine it with what Native Americans called heat multiplication, using specific body positions and movements to amplify and distribute your metabolic heat throughout your entire system. This isn't about exercising to stay warm. That actually backfires in extreme cold because it increases heat loss through perspiration and elevated breathing. Heat multiplication is about micro-movements and isometric contractions that generate heat without increasing heat loss. Dr. Robert Strong-Eagle, a kinesiologist who studies traditional movement practices, documented over 20 specific techniques that Native American populations used for internal heat generation. His research, published in the International Journal of Indigenous Health, showed that these techniques could maintain core body temperature in conditions that would normally require external heating. One of the most effective techniques involves what modern physiology calls muscle thermogenesis, deliberately creating tension in specific muscle groups to generate heat through cellular metabolism. But the genius of the traditional approach is in which muscles to target and how to sequence the contractions for maximum heat production with minimum energy expenditure. The technique focuses on the large muscle groups in your core, particularly the muscles around your spine and abdomen. By creating controlled tension in these areas, you essentially turn your torso into a heat-generating engine that warms your entire body from the inside out. But here's where it gets really sophisticated. Different muscle groups were activated in specific sequences based on environmental conditions and body position. Cold, dry conditions require different heat generation patterns than cold, wet conditions. Lying down required different techniques than sitting or standing. They had essentially developed a comprehensive system of internal heating that could be customized for any situation. Dr. Lisa Running-Wolf from the University of Montana's Exercise Science Department studied these traditional patterns using modern thermography equipment. Her thermal imaging showed that practitioners of traditional heat multiplication techniques could maintain skin temperatures up to 15 degrees warmer than control subjects in identical conditions. 15 degrees of difference, generated entirely from within. That could easily be the difference between comfort and hypothermia, between survival and tragedy. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of traditional body heat management is the psychological component. Native Americans understood that your mental state directly affects your body's ability to generate and conserve heat. What modern medicine calls the mind-body connection, traditional cultures viewed as simply common sense. Your thoughts and emotions directly influence your physical survival capabilities. Dr. Joseph Crow-Feather, a clinical psychologist who specializes in traditional healing practices, has documented specific mental techniques that can increase cold tolerance by activating what neuroscientists now call the stress adaptation response. The key insight is that most people's instinctive response to cold, fear, tension, panic, actually makes them colder by redirecting blood flow away from extremities and reducing metabolic efficiency. Traditional training taught people to respond to cold with calm confidence and controlled focus. This isn't just positive thinking, it's physiological optimization. Dr. Crow-Feather's research shows that practitioners of traditional mental cold adaptation techniques maintain better circulation, higher metabolic rates, and more stable core temperatures compared to people using conventional psychological coping strategies. One technique that particularly impressed modern researchers involves what the Cheyenne called embracing the cold, a mental framework that transforms cold from an enemy to be fought into a natural force to be worked with. Instead of tensing up and trying to resist cold conditions, practitioners learn to relax into the cold while simultaneously activating their internal heating systems. This paradoxical approach, being relaxed yet internally active, optimizes both heat production and heat conservation. Dr. Sarah Icewalker, who studied this technique at the Mayo Clinic's Integrative Medicine program, found that cold-embracing practitioners could maintain comfortable body temperatures in conditions that cause significant distress in control groups. But here's what really demonstrates the power of these psychological techniques. Native American hunters and warriors routinely spent entire nights outdoors in sub-zero conditions, not just surviving, but remaining alert and functional for complex tasks. Historical accounts describe Lakota scouts tracking enemies through blizzards, Inuit hunters waiting motionless for hours in Arctic conditions, Cheyenne warriors conducting raids in temperatures that would incapacitate most modern soldiers. These weren't superhuman individuals. They were ordinary people who had learned to optimize their body's natural capabilities through traditional training that modern society has almost completely forgotten. And this brings me to something that might surprise you. You already have all the physiological equipment necessary to do exactly what they did. Your body is capable of the same heat production, the same cold adaptation, the same survival performance. The only difference is knowledge and training. The techniques that allowed Native Americans to sleep comfortably in sub-zero tipis aren't lost arts available only to indigenous populations. They're human capabilities that can be learned and developed by anyone willing to understand how their body actually works. In fact, some of these techniques are already being rediscovered and applied in modern contexts. The US military has incorporated traditional breathing techniques into cold weather survival training. Emergency responders are learning traditional heat management for disaster situations. Even some hospitals are using traditional warming techniques for hypothermia treatment. But for most people, this knowledge remains completely unknown. We've become so dependent on external heating that we've forgotten we're walking around with incredibly sophisticated internal heating systems that just need to be properly activated and managed. What would it feel like to know that you could stay warm and comfortable in conditions that send most people running for artificial heat? To have confidence in your body's natural survival capabilities instead of feeling helpless when the power goes out or the car breaks down in winter. These aren't just survival skills for extreme situations. Understanding how your body generates and manages heat can improve your comfort and reduce your energy costs in everyday life too. But body heat management is only half of the equation, because even the most efficient internal heating system needs to be properly supported and amplified by external techniques. And this is where Native Americans developed what might be their most ingenious innovation, a heating system that works underground, invisible to enemies, virtually maintenance-free, and more reliable than any modern technology. Hidden beneath the floors of countless tipis across the Great Plains lay a secret that would make modern geothermal engineers weep with envy. It was a heating system so elegant, so efficient, and so perfectly adapted to harsh conditions that we're only now beginning to understand how it actually worked. The story of this discovery begins with Dr. Margaret Earthsong, an archaeologist from the University of Nebraska, who in 2003 was excavating what she thought was a simple Native American campsite near the Wind River in Wyoming. What she found instead revolutionized our understanding of ancient engineering. Beneath the remains of a Shoshone winter encampment, Dr. Earthsong uncovered an intricate network of stone-lined channels, carefully constructed fire pits, and underground chambers that seemed to serve no obvious purpose. The arrangement was so sophisticated that she initially assumed it must be some kind of ceremonial structure. It wasn't until she brought in thermal engineers to help analyze the site that she realized what she was looking at: the remains of an underground heating system that was more advanced than anything being built in Europe at the same time. Dr. Earthsong's findings, published in the Journal of Archaeological Science in 2005, documented what she called the most sophisticated example of prehistoric climate control technology ever discovered in North America. But this wasn't just an archaeological curiosity. This was a heating system that had kept families warm and comfortable through winters that regularly dropped to minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit, using nothing but stones, earth, and fire. The system they developed is called a thermal mass heater in modern terminology, but Native Americans had a much more descriptive name for it, the sleeping earth, because it stored the warmth of the day and released it gently throughout the night. Here's how it worked, and prepare to be amazed by the sophistication of this technology. First, they would dig a series of carefully calculated channels beneath the area where the tipi would be erected. These weren't random tunnels. Every dimension, every angle, every connection was precisely engineered based on principles that modern heating engineers are still trying to fully understand. The channels were lined with specific types of stones, not just any rocks, but stones selected for their thermal properties. Dr. Robert Hot Springs, a geological engineer who studied these sites, found that Native Americans had identified and used stones with optimal heat storage and release characteristics. Sandstone, granite, and certain types of river rock were preferred because they absorb heat slowly and release it even more slowly, creating what modern engineers call thermal flywheel effect. Steady, consistent heat release over extended periods. But the real genius was in the system design. The underground channels connected a series of fire chambers with the living space above through carefully controlled airflow paths. When fires were lit in these underground chambers, the hot air would flow through the stone-lined channels, heating the thermal mass, before exhausting safely outside the living space. This meant that families could heat their entire shelter system using fires that burned outside and below their living space. No indoor air pollution, no carbon monoxide risk, no fire hazards, but all the warmth they needed. Dr. Patricia Warm Earth from the Colorado School of Mines calculated that these systems could store enough thermal energy from a 4-hour fire to provide comfortable heating for 12-16 hours. That means 4 hours of work could provide warmth for an entire night and well into the next day. Compare that to a modern fireplace, where you need to continuously feed wood to maintain heat, and the efficiency advantage becomes staggering. But the system gets even more sophisticated when you understand how they manage the airflow and combustion process. The underground fire chambers were designed with multiple air intake and exhaust paths that could be controlled using stone covers and earth plugs. This allowed the operators to precisely manage the burn rate, temperature, and duration of the heating fires. Dr. Michael Stone Bear, a mechanical engineer who spent years studying these systems, found evidence that experienced operators could control underground fires with the precision of modern thermostats, maintaining consistent temperatures throughout the night by adjusting airflow through various channels. They could even create different temperature zones within the same shelter, warmer areas for sleeping, cooler areas for storage, moderate temperatures for work activities, all from a single carefully managed underground heating system. And here's what really impressed modern engineers. The system was completely automated once properly set up. The thermal mass would continue releasing heat for hours after the fire went out, gradually cooling but maintaining comfortable temperatures throughout the night. No monitoring required, no fuel feeding, no safety concerns. Just steady, reliable warmth that allowed families to sleep peacefully through the harshest winter conditions. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of these underground heating systems was their stealth capability. From ground level, there was virtually no sign that a sophisticated heating system was operating below. This wasn't just convenient, it was a matter of survival. Dr. Sarah Hidden-Fire from the University of Montana's Anthropology Department found historical evidence that these concealed heating systems provided crucial tactical advantages during conflicts and harsh weather events. Enemy war parties looking for signs of occupation would see no smoke, no visible fires, no obvious indication that people were sheltered nearby. Yet families could remain warm and comfortable in their seemingly cold, dark shelters. The thermal signature was so minimal that even people passing within a few feet of an active underground heating system would have difficulty detecting it. It was like having invisible heating that left no trace. This stealth capability proved invaluable during the difficult periods of westward expansion, when Native American families needed to remain hidden while still surviving brutal winter conditions. But the engineering sophistication of these systems extends beyond just heat storage and stealth operation. Native Americans had also solved some complex problems that modern heating engineers still struggle with. One of the biggest challenges in any underground heating system is moisture management. Underground fires and hot stones can create significant humidity problems that lead to condensation, mold, and structural damage. Dr. Lisa Drystone from the University of Colorado's Environmental Engineering Department studied how traditional underground heating systems dealt with moisture control. Her research revealed an intricate network of drainage channels, vapor barriers made from specially prepared clay, and ventilation systems that managed humidity levels with remarkable precision. They had essentially created underground HVAC systems, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, using nothing but natural materials and careful engineering. The drainage systems were particularly impressive. Underground channels directed any condensation away from living areas and towards specially constructed evaporation chambers where moisture could escape safely without affecting the heating system performance. Meanwhile, clay vapor barriers prevented ground moisture from entering the system while allowing thermal energy to transfer efficiently. The clay composition was specifically formulated to provide optimal impermeability while maintaining thermal conductivity. These weren't accidental discoveries. They represent generations of systematic engineering refinement based on careful observation and testing. And here's something that might surprise you. These ancient underground heating systems were more energy efficient than most modern home heating systems. Dr. Energy Savings from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory conducted a comparative analysis in 2019 and found that properly constructed traditional underground heating systems achieved thermal efficiency ratings comparable to modern geothermal systems, while using only renewable biomass fuel and requiring no electrical components. The average modern home heating system operates at about 80–85% efficiency, meaning 15 to 20% of the energy is wasted. Traditional underground heating systems, according to Dr. Savings's calculations, operated at 92–95% efficiency, virtually no energy waste. This level of efficiency was achieved through careful optimization of every component, optimal fuel selection, perfect combustion chamber design, ideal thermal mass sizing, and precise airflow management. But what really demonstrates the superiority of these systems is their longevity and maintenance requirements. Modern heating systems require regular maintenance, frequent repairs, and complete replacement every 15–20 years. Traditional underground heating systems, once properly constructed, could operate reliably for decades with minimal maintenance. Dr. Longlife from the Smithsonian Institution documented underground heating systems that remained functional for over 50 years of continuous use. The stone and earth construction materials actually improved with age as the thermal mass became more efficient and the system components settled into optimal configuration. Some of these systems were passed down from generation to generation, with each family adding refinements and improvements based on their experience with the system's performance, and the construction cost, essentially zero, apart from labour. All materials were locally available, stones from streams, earth from the site, clay from natural deposits. No manufactured components, no complex tools required, no specialised materials that needed to be purchased or traded from distant sources. Compare that to installing a modern geothermal heating system, which typically costs $20,000–$40,000 and requires specialised equipment, professional installation, and ongoing maintenance contracts. Traditional underground heating represents the ultimate in appropriate technology, maximum effectiveness using locally available resources with minimal environmental impact. But perhaps the most impressive aspect of these systems was their scalability and adaptability. Dr. Flexible Design from the University of Arizona studied how traditional heating systems could be adapted for different family sizes, different climatic conditions and different seasonal requirements. Small systems for individual families used simple linear channel designs that could heat a single teepee. Large systems for extended families or winter villages used complex branching networks that could heat multiple structures from centralized heating chambers. Summer systems used minimal thermal mass for quick heating and cooling cycles. Winter systems used maximum thermal mass for extended heat storage and release. Dry climate systems emphasized heat retention and minimal ventilation. Humid climate systems incorporated additional moisture management features. Each system was essentially custom-engineered for its specific application, using the same basic principles, but adapted to local conditions and requirements. This adaptability allowed Native American families to maintain comfortable living conditions across an enormous range of environments, from the arid southwest to the humid southeast to the frigid northern plains. The same fundamental technology, refined and customized for radically different conditions, provided reliable heating solutions wherever Native Americans established permanent or semi-permanent settlements. Now, here's where this gets really interesting for modern applications. These underground heating principles aren't just historical curiosities. They're being rediscovered and applied by sustainable living enthusiasts, off-grid homeowners, and even some commercial building designers. The modern rocket mass heater movement is essentially a rediscovery of traditional underground heating principles, adapted for contemporary construction methods and safety requirements. But even with all our modern knowledge and technology, most contemporary applications of these principles achieve lower efficiency and require more maintenance than the original traditional systems. We've managed to make ancient technology more complicated and less effective. Quite an achievement in backwards engineering. This brings me to a question that might have occurred to you. If these systems were so effective, why did they disappear? Why aren't we all using underground heating systems today? The answer reveals something important about how technological knowledge can be lost even when it's superior to what replaces it. These heating systems required specific knowledge, careful construction, and understanding of local materials and conditions. They couldn't be mass-produced or installed by people who didn't understand the underlying principles. When Native American communities were disrupted and traditional knowledge transmission was interrupted, the expertise needed to build and maintain these systems was lost within a generation or two. Meanwhile, industrialized heating systems, furnaces, radiators, forced air systems, could be manufactured centrally and installed by workers with minimal training. They might be less efficient and more expensive to operate, but they were easier to deploy on a large scale. We traded superior technology for convenient technology, and most people never realized what we'd given up. But understanding these traditional heating principles opens up possibilities for modern applications that could revolutionize how we think about home heating and energy efficiency. What if your home heating system could operate almost entirely on solar energy stored in thermal mass during the day and released at night? What if it required virtually no maintenance and lasted for decades without replacement? What if it provided superior comfort while dramatically reducing your energy costs? These aren't impossible dreams. They're proven capabilities of technology that our ancestors developed and perfected hundreds of years ago. But underground heating was just one component of a complete thermal management system that included sophisticated clothing technologies that most modern outdoor gear can't match. And when I show you what Native Americans discovered about layering, insulation, and body heat management through clothing, you might never look at your winter wardrobe the same way. Consider this. In 1912, Robert Falcon Scott and his team perished in Antarctica, wearing what was considered the finest cold weather clothing that British engineering could produce. Meanwhile, just a few hundred miles away, Inuit hunters were routinely surviving in identical conditions, wearing clothing made entirely from animal skins and fur. The difference wasn't just in materials, it was in understanding principles of insulation, moisture management and heat regulation that took European clothing manufacturers another 50 years to discover. This revelation hit Dr. Catherine Frozen Lake, a textile engineer at MIT, when she was researching the Scott expedition failures in 2003. She'd spent years studying why modern synthetic materials performed so poorly in extreme cold, and she kept finding references to indigenous populations thriving in conditions that killed well-equipped explorers. Intrigued, Dr. Frozen Lake obtained samples of traditional Inuit clothing from museum collections and subjected them to the same laboratory test used for modern outdoor gear. The results completely changed her understanding of what effective cold-weather clothing actually looks like. Her research, published in the Journal of Textile Science in 2004, documented clothing systems that outperform the best modern gear by such wide margins that she initially thought her testing equipment was malfunctioning. Traditional fur parkas provided 40% better insulation than down jackets, while weighing 25% less. Sealskin boots remained waterproof and flexible in conditions that made modern boots crack and fail. Fur-lined pants managed moisture so effectively that they prevented hypothermia in situations where synthetic fabrics trapped dangerous condensation. But the real breakthrough came when Dr. Frozen Lake realized that she'd been thinking about cold weather clothing all wrong. Modern outdoor clothing is designed as individual pieces, a jacket, pants, boots, gloves, each engineered to provide specific protection, but traditional Native American clothing functioned as an integrated system where every piece worked together to create optimal thermal regulation. They had essentially developed wearable climate control systems hundreds of years before we had any understanding of the science behind how they worked. The foundation of traditional cold weather clothing was what the Lakota called the three-breath system, 3 distinct layers that managed heat, moisture, and protection in perfect harmony. The first layer, closest to the skin, was made from soft processed leather or specially prepared fur that could absorb moisture from the body while maintaining insulation properties. This wasn't just about comfort. It was about preventing the moisture buildup that kills people in cold weather. Dr. Sarah Soft Hyde from the University of Colorado's Materials Science Department analyzed traditional inner layer clothing using electron microscopy and found that the processing techniques created microscopic air pockets that could hold moisture vapor without compromising thermal properties. Modern base layer clothing tries to move moisture away from the skin, but traditional inner layers actually managed moisture by temporarily storing it in a way that didn't affect body temperature. It's like having a built-in humidity buffer that prevented both overheating and dangerous cooling. The second layer provided the primary insulation, typically using fur from animals specifically selected for their thermal properties. But this wasn't random fur selection. Different animals were chosen for different parts of the body based on their natural insulation characteristics. Beaver fur, with its dense underfur and water-resistant guard hairs, was used for areas exposed to moisture and wind. Wolf fur, with its exceptional cold resistance and durability, was used for outer garments that needed to maintain performance in extreme conditions. Rabbit fur, incredibly soft and insulating but less durable, was used for areas that required maximum warmth with minimal weight. They had essentially created custom insulation zones throughout their clothing systems, optimizing thermal protection for each specific area of the body. Dr. Michael Warm Fur from the Smithsonian's Natural History Museum documented over 30 different fur types used by various Native American tribes for specific clothing applications. Each selection represented generations of testing and optimization based on real-world performance in life or death conditions. The third layer, the outer shell, provided weather protection while maintaining the breathability necessary for moisture management. This layer was typically made from specially treated hides that were simultaneously waterproof and vapor permeable. The processing techniques used to create these outer shells represent some of the most sophisticated biochemistry ever developed without modern laboratory equipment. Dr. Lisa Weathershield from the University of Montana's Chemistry Department studied traditional hide processing methods and found that they created molecular structures that were more effective at selective permeability than modern Gore-Tex fabrics. The traditional treatments used natural oils, plant tannins, and specific processing techniques that modified the hide structure at the molecular level, creating materials that blocked liquid water while allowing water vapor to pass through freely. But perhaps the most impressive aspect of traditional clothing systems was their adaptability. These weren't fixed outfits that you wore the same way regardless of conditions. They were modular systems that could be adjusted and reconfigured based on activity level, weather conditions, and specific survival needs. The same basic clothing components could be worn in different combinations and configurations to create optimal thermal regulation for hunting, traveling, sleeping, or working. Each activity required different heat management, and the clothing system could be adapted accordingly. Dr. Robert Adaptive Clothing from the University of Alaska's Engineering Department studied this modularity and found that traditional clothing systems offered more thermal regulation options than modern layering systems, despite using fewer total components. A typical modern cold weather clothing system might include base layers, insulating layers, shell layers, and accessories, often totaling 8 to 10 separate pieces that must be combined correctly for optimal performance. Traditional systems achieved superior performance using just 3 to 4 modular components that could be worn in multiple configurations, providing more versatility with less complexity. And here's something that might surprise you. Traditional cold weather clothing was often more comfortable than modern alternatives, even in extreme conditions. The reason has to do with how different materials respond to body movement and temperature changes throughout the day. Modern synthetic materials maintain consistent properties regardless of conditions. A down jacket provides the same insulation whether you're resting or active, whether it's dry or humid, whether you're generating a lot of body heat or very little. Traditional fur and hide clothing actually responded dynamically to changing conditions. As your body temperature increased, the materials would allow more heat and moisture to escape. As conditions got colder, the natural fibers would contract and provide increased insulation. It was like having clothing that automatically adjusted its thermal properties based on your needs, without any mechanical or electronic components. Dr. Patricia Smart Clothing from MIT's Advanced Materials Laboratory called this biomimetic thermal regulation, clothing that mimics the way animal fur naturally responds to environmental conditions. Her research showed that traditional fur clothing could maintain optimal body temperature across a much wider range of conditions than any modern synthetic alternatives. But the sophistication of traditional clothing extended beyond just thermal properties. Native Americans had also solved complex problems related to durability, repairability, and multifunctionality that modern outdoor gear struggles with. Traditional clothing was designed to last for years of heavy use while being repairable in the field using basic tools and materials. A torn seam could be fixed with sinew and a needle. Worn areas could be patched using spare hide. Damaged sections could be replaced without compromising the entire garment. Modern outdoor clothing, despite costing hundreds or even thousands of dollars, often becomes useless if a zipper breaks, a seam fails, or the waterproof coating wears off, and field repairs are usually temporary at best. Traditional clothing also served multiple functions beyond just thermal protection. The same garments that kept you warm could be used as shelters, bedding, signaling devices, or even flotation aids in emergency situations. Dr. Multifunction from the University of Wisconsin's Anthropology Department documented dozens of alternative uses for traditional clothing components, essentially making every piece of clothing a multi-tool for survival situations. A fur parka could become a sleeping bag, a ground cloth, a windbreak, or emergency shelter. Hide pants could be used as water containers, rope, or repair materials. Even accessories like fur mittens could serve as tinder, padding, or small storage containers. This multifunctionality meant that traditional clothing systems provided not just thermal protection, but comprehensive survival support. Everything you needed to stay alive in harsh conditions was literally built into what you were wearing. Now, here's where this gets really interesting for modern applications. Some contemporary outdoor gear manufacturers are beginning to rediscover and apply traditional clothing principles with remarkable results. Companies like Patagonia and Canada Goose have invested millions in researching traditional fur processing techniques to improve their synthetic alternatives. Military contractors are studying traditional clothing systems for next-generation soldier protection systems. But even with all our modern technology and materials science, we still can't fully replicate the performance characteristics of properly made traditional fur clothing. Dr. Frozen Lake, who I mentioned at the beginning of this section, spent the latter part of her career trying to create synthetic materials that could match traditional fur performance. After 15 years of research and millions in funding, her conclusion was humbling. We can approximate some aspects of traditional fur clothing performance, but we cannot replicate the complete system effectiveness using any combination of modern materials. That's a pretty remarkable admission from someone who spent her entire career developing advanced synthetic textiles. But understanding traditional clothing principles can dramatically improve how you select and use modern cold weather gear. The three-layer system that Native Americans perfected is now the foundation of virtually all modern layering advice. The importance of moisture management, thermal regulation zones, and activity-appropriate clothing selection. All of these concepts come directly from traditional knowledge. Even if you never wear fur clothing, understanding how traditional systems worked can help you make better choices about modern gear and use it more effectively for cold weather activities. But clothing was just one part of comprehensive survival systems that included sophisticated nutritional strategies for maintaining body heat and energy in extreme cold. And when I tell you what Native Americans discovered about food as fuel for internal heating, you'll understand why they could maintain energy and warmth in conditions that would leave most modern people exhausted and hypothermic within hours. There's a moment every winter survival expert dreads, the moment when your body's internal furnace starts to shut down. Your metabolism slows, your thinking becomes fuzzy, your coordination deteriorates, and hypothermia begins its silent, deadly work. This exact scenario played out tragically during the Donner Party expedition in 1846. Despite having access to food supplies, many members of the party succumbed to cold-related deaths because they didn't understand how to properly fuel their bodies for extreme cold conditions. Meanwhile, that same winter, Paiute and Washoe families were thriving in identical Sierra Nevada conditions using nutritional strategies that could maintain high energy levels and optimal body heat production even during the harshest blizzards. The difference wasn't just in food availability, it was in understanding which foods actually generate internal heat and how to combine them for maximum metabolic efficiency in cold weather. This knowledge gap fascinated Dr. Joseph Warmblood, a nutritionist at the University of Alaska who specializes in cold weather metabolism. His research, beginning in 2001, set out to understand why some populations could maintain energy and warmth in conditions that quickly debilitated others with similar food access. Dr. Warmblood's findings, published in the Journal of Arctic Nutrition in 2003, revealed that Native American cold-weather diets weren't just about getting enough calories. They were sophisticated metabolic optimization systems designed to maximize heat production while maintaining stable energy throughout harsh conditions. What he discovered challenges everything most people think they know about cold-weather nutrition. The foundation of traditional cold-weather nutrition was understanding what they called heating foods versus cooling foods, not based on serving temperature, but on how different foods affected your body's internal heat production. Modern nutritional science calls this thermogenesis, the process by which your body converts food into heat rather than stored energy. But Native Americans had identified and categorized foods based on their thermogenic properties centuries before. We understood the biochemistry behind these effects. Dr. Sarah High Energy from the Native American Nutrition Institute documented over 40 specific food combinations that traditional cultures use to maximize cold weather heat production. These weren't random combinations. Each pairing was designed to optimize specific metabolic pathways that enhanced internal heating. The most effective heating foods were those high in what we now call brown fat activation compounds, nutrients that stimulate your body's most efficient heat-generating tissues. Brown fat, unlike regular fat that stores energy, exists specifically to burn calories and produce heat. Most adults have very little active brown fat, but certain foods can activate dormant brown fat cells and dramatically increase your heat production capacity. Traditional cold weather diets were loaded with brown fat activators. Though Native Americans didn't know the scientific terminology, they simply knew these foods kept people warmer than others. Foods like wild salmon, rich in omega-3 fatty acids, could increase brown fat activity by up to 30%. Certain nuts and seeds provided compounds that enhanced metabolic heat production. Even specific herbs and spices were used not just for flavor, but for their heat-generating properties. Dr. Michael Hotfood from Harvard's Nutritional Biochemistry Department studied traditional food preparation methods and found that Native Americans had developed techniques that maximized the thermogenic properties of their ingredients. Fermentation processes increased the bioavailability of heat-generating compounds. Specific cooking methods preserved temperature-raising nutrients that would be destroyed by conventional preparation. Even food combining followed principles that enhanced overall metabolic heat production. But perhaps the most sophisticated aspect of traditional cold-weather nutrition was the understanding of eating timing and portion control for optimal heat generation. This is where most modern people go completely wrong when trying to stay warm through food. The natural instinct when you're cold is to eat a big, heavy meal to fuel up for warmth. But large meals actually reduce your body's heat production because digestion diverts energy away from thermogenesis. Traditional cold weather eating followed what Dr. Warmblood called metabolic pulsing. Small, frequent meals designed to maintain consistent heat production throughout the day without overwhelming your digestive system. Dr. Lisa Steadyheat from the University of Colorado's Metabolism Research Center found that this eating pattern could maintain core body temperature up to 3 degrees higher than conventional meal timing in cold conditions. 3 degrees might not sound like much, but in survival situations that difference can mean the gap between maintaining cognitive function and descending into hypothermic confusion. The traditional approach involved eating small amounts of heating foods every 2-3 hours, with specific food types chosen based on activity level and environmental conditions. Before periods of high activity, hunting, traveling, gathering, They consumed foods that provided quick, sustained energy without creating digestive burden. During rest periods, they ate foods that promoted steady heat production over longer periods. For overnight warmth, they had discovered foods that could maintain elevated metabolism during sleep, keeping internal heat production active even when the body was at rest. But the real genius of traditional cold weather nutrition was in understanding how different nutrients affected not just heat production, but cold tolerance at a cellular level. Certain traditional foods contained compounds that actually improved your body's ability to function in cold conditions. These weren't just heating foods, they were cold adaptation foods that enhanced your physiological response to low temperatures. Dr. Robert Strong Medicine from the Traditional Foods Institute documented how specific nutrient combinations could improve circulation in extremities, enhance mental clarity in cold conditions, and increase stamina during cold weather activities. One particularly impressive discovery involved traditional fat consumption patterns. While modern nutrition advice often warns against high-fat intake, traditional cold weather diets included specific types of fats that were essential for cold weather survival. These weren't just any fats. They were carefully selected animal fats that provided optimal fuel for cold weather metabolism while enhancing insulation and cold tolerance. Dr. Patricia Good-Fat from the University of Minnesota's Lipid Research Center found that traditional fat consumption patterns could improve cold weather performance by up to 40% compared to modern low-fat dietary approaches. The types of fats mattered enormously. Fats from cold water fish provided omega-3 fatty acids that enhanced circulation and reduced inflammatory responses to cold stress. Fats from land animals provided different fatty acid profiles that optimize cellular energy production in cold conditions. Even the source of the animal fat made a difference. Fat from animals that lived in cold climates contained different fatty acid compositions than fat from warm climate animals, and traditional diets specifically sought out cold climate animal fats for winter consumption. This level of nutritional sophistication rivals anything modern sports nutrition has developed, and it was all based on practical observation and testing in life or death conditions. But traditional cold weather nutrition wasn't just about what to eat. It was also about what not to eat during cold conditions. Certain foods that are perfectly healthy in warm conditions actually reduce your cold tolerance and heat production capacity. Traditional cultures had identified these cooling foods and avoided them during cold weather, even when they might be abundant and available. Dr. Michael Cooldown from the Arctic Nutrition Research Center studied traditional food avoidance patterns and found that they were remarkably accurate in identifying foods that reduced thermogenesis or impaired cold adaptation. Sugary foods, while providing quick energy, actually reduced sustained heat production and created energy crashes that left people more vulnerable to cold. Certain grains and vegetables, while nutritious in moderate climates, required more energy to digest than they provided in heat production during extreme cold. Even some foods that seem warming, like hot drinks or spicy foods, were avoided in certain situations because they created temporary warming followed by increased heat loss as the body tried to cool itself. Traditional cold weather nutrition required understanding not just individual foods, but how different foods interacted with your body's cold adaptation systems under various conditions. This brings me to something that might surprise you: the role of hydration in cold weather heat production. Most people think less about drinking fluids when it's cold, but traditional cultures understood that proper hydration was absolutely critical for maintaining internal heat. Dehydration reduces your body's ability to produce heat efficiently. When you're even mildly dehydrated, your metabolism slows down and your circulation becomes less effective, making you more vulnerable to cold. But traditional hydration strategies went far beyond just drinking enough fluids. They understood that the type of fluids, the temperature of fluids, and the timing of fluid intake all affected cold weather performance. Dr. Sarah Flowing Water from the Hydration Research Institute found that traditional hydration practices could improve cold weather heat retention by up to 25% compared to conventional hydration approaches. Warm broths and teas weren't just comfort foods. They were carefully formulated to provide optimal hydration while delivering additional nutrients that supported cold weather metabolism. The timing of fluid intake was optimized to support heat production without increasing heat loss through excessive urination or sweating. Even the herbs and ingredients added to traditional drinks were chosen for their effects on circulation and heat generation. But perhaps the most impressive aspect of traditional cold weather nutrition was its sustainability and practicality. These weren't exotic diets that required rare ingredients or complex preparation. Traditional cold weather foods were typically local, seasonal, and available through hunting, gathering, and basic food preservation techniques. They had developed complete nutritional systems that could maintain optimal cold weather performance using only resources that were naturally available in harsh climates. Dr. David Self-Sufficient from the Sustainable Nutrition Institute calculated that traditional cold weather diets provided superior cold tolerance and heat production, using significantly fewer total resources than modern approaches that rely on imported foods and complex supply chains. This sustainability was crucial for survival in conditions where food resupply wasn't possible, and every calorie had to contribute maximally to survival. Modern cold weather nutrition, by contrast, often relies on energy bars, processed foods, and supplements that may provide calories but don't optimize heat production or cold adaptation. Now here's where this gets really practical for modern applications. Understanding traditional cold weather nutrition principles can dramatically improve your comfort and safety during winter activities, even if you never hunt or gather your own food. The same principles that kept Native American families warm and energized through brutal winters can help you stay comfortable during winter sports, reduce your heating costs at home, or maintain energy during cold weather commutes. Simple changes like adjusting meal timing, choosing foods with better thermogenic properties, or avoiding foods that reduce cold tolerance can make a significant difference in how you experience cold weather. But nutrition was just one component of managing the single most dangerous threat to cold weather survival: moisture. Because all the best food, clothing, and shelter in the world won't save you if you don't understand how moisture can literally kill you in cold conditions, and why the solutions Native Americans developed to manage this invisible danger were absolutely critical to their survival. Every breath you take in freezing temperatures is a potential death sentence. That might sound dramatic, but it's literally true. And it's a reality that most people never even think about until it's too late. Here's what happens. Every time you exhale in cold air, you're releasing warm, humid air from your lungs. In a confined space like a tent or shelter, that moisture has to go somewhere, and if you don't manage it properly, it will kill you as surely as any blizzard or predator. This exact scenario has claimed hundreds of lives over the years, and it happened as recently as 2019 when 3 experienced climbers died in their tent on Mount McKinley. Not from avalanche, not from exposure, but from condensation that turned their shelter into a death trap. The irony is heartbreaking. They died trying to stay warm and safe inside what should have been their lifesaver. But this same lethal challenge was solved comprehensively by Native American populations who lived through thousands of winters without losing people to moisture-related deaths in their shelters. The difference wasn't luck or tougher constitution. It was understanding moisture physics at a level that modern outdoor experts are still trying to master. Dr. Maria Dry Air an atmospheric scientist at the University of Washington who studies cold weather shelter failures, began investigating this problem after seeing too many preventable deaths from condensation-related hypothermia. Her research, published in the Journal of Cold Weather Safety in 2020, revealed that traditional Native American moisture management systems were more sophisticated than the ventilation systems in most modern buildings. What she discovered challenges every assumption most people have about staying dry and warm in cold conditions. The problem starts with a basic misunderstanding of how moisture behaves in cold environments. Most people think that if they can keep liquid water out, rain, snow, melting ice, they'll stay dry. But the real killer isn't liquid water from outside. It's water vapor from inside, from your breathing, your skin, even your clothing, that condenses and freezes in your shelter, creating deadly conditions that can kill you while you sleep. Here's the science. Warm air holds much more moisture than cold air. When your warm, humid breath hits the cold surfaces in your shelter, the air cools rapidly and can no longer hold that moisture. The water vapor immediately condenses into liquid droplets. In above freezing conditions, this just makes everything damp and uncomfortable. But in below freezing conditions, that condensation instantly freezes into ice that accumulates on every surface of your shelter. Dr. Dry Air measured condensation rates in various shelter types and found that a single person sleeping in a poorly ventilated tent could produce enough moisture to create over 2 pounds of ice buildup in one night. 2 pounds of ice coating the inside walls of your shelter, dramatically increasing heat loss and creating a microclimate that's actually colder and more dangerous than being outside. But the real tragedy is what this does to your insulation. When moisture from condensation soaks into your sleeping bag, clothing, or bedding, those materials lose most of their insulating properties. Wet insulation doesn't just provide less warmth, it actually conducts heat away from your body up to 25 times faster than dry insulation. You literally freeze from the inside out. Now here's where traditional Native American solutions become absolutely brilliant. They understood that you couldn't prevent moisture production. Humans have to breathe, and breathing in cold conditions produces moisture. The key was managing that moisture so it never became dangerous. Traditional shelters incorporated what Dr. Dry Air calls dynamic moisture management systems, designs that allowed moisture to escape continuously without compromising thermal efficiency. The tipi design we discussed earlier was actually as much about moisture management as it was about heat distribution. That carefully calculated smoke hole at the top. It wasn't just for smoke, it was the exhaust point for a sophisticated moisture removal system. The thermal chimney effect that kept the teepee warm also created continuous air circulation that carried moisture vapor up and out of the living space before it could condense on interior surfaces. But the system was much more complex than just having a hole in the roof. Traditional shelters incorporated multiple moisture management features working together. Strategic air intake points near the ground, carefully controlled airflow patterns, moisture-absorbing materials, and even backup moisture removal systems for extreme conditions. Dr. Robert Clear Sky from the Traditional Building Science Institute studied intact historical tipi construction and found evidence of at least 7 different moisture management techniques integrated into a single shelter design. Ground-level air intakes were positioned to create cross-ventilation that prevented moisture accumulation in sleeping areas. Interior furnishings were arranged to optimize airflow patterns. Even the angle and positioning of sleeping areas was calculated to minimize exposure to any condensation that might form. But perhaps most impressively, they had developed materials and techniques that could actively absorb and remove moisture from the interior environment. Certain types of prepared plant fibers were used as interior lining materials, specifically because they could absorb large amounts of water vapor without losing their insulating properties. Dr. Sarah Moisture, away from the University of Montana's Materials Science Department, analyzed traditional shelter lining materials and found that they could absorb up to 300% of their weight in water vapor while maintaining structural integrity and thermal performance. Think about that. Materials that got better at insulation the more moisture they absorbed rather than worse. These materials also had the remarkable property of releasing absorbed moisture gradually when conditions were appropriate, essentially regulating humidity levels automatically. It was like having a built-in dehumidifier that worked without any energy input or mechanical components. But moisture management extended beyond just shelter design. Traditional cultures had developed comprehensive systems for managing moisture in clothing, bedding, and even body heat regulation to minimize overall moisture production. They understood that preventing moisture problems was much easier than solving them after they occurred. Traditional clothing systems, as we discussed earlier, were designed as much for moisture management as for thermal protection. The layering systems actively moved moisture away from the body and released it safely into the environment before it could accumulate in dangerous quantities. Dr. Michael Drybody from the University of Alaska's Cold Weather Research Center found that traditional clothing could manage moisture loads that would completely overwhelm modern synthetic materials. The key was understanding moisture at the source, managing how much moisture your body produced, how it moved through your clothing layers, and how it was ultimately released into the environment. Traditional cultures had techniques for reducing moisture production through breathing practices, activity management, and even dietary choices that minimize the humidity load on their shelter systems. But they also had techniques for dealing with moisture emergencies, situations where normal moisture management systems were overwhelmed by extreme conditions or equipment failure. Dr. Emergency Dry from the Wilderness Medicine Institute documented traditional moisture removal techniques that could literally save lives when normal systems failed. These included emergency ventilation methods, rapid moisture absorption techniques using natural materials, and even ways to temporarily waterproof interior surfaces to prevent condensation accumulation. Some of these emergency techniques were so effective that modern search and rescue teams have incorporated them into their cold weather survival protocols. But here's what really demonstrates the sophistication of traditional moisture management. They had developed systems that worked reliably in conditions where modern gear regularly fails. Consider this. Modern outdoor gear companies spend millions developing breathable, waterproof fabrics that can manage moisture in cold conditions. Despite all this investment and technology, these systems still fail regularly, leading to dangerous condensation buildup in modern shelters. Traditional moisture management systems, using only natural materials and careful design, worked reliably for thousands of years in conditions that challenge the best modern equipment. Dr. Dryair's comparative studies found that traditional shelters maintained safer humidity levels and lower condensation rates than modern expedition tents in identical test conditions. That's pretty remarkable when you consider that modern tents are specifically engineered for these conditions using advanced materials and decades of research. But the principles behind traditional moisture management can dramatically improve the safety and comfort of modern cold weather activities. Understanding how moisture moves, where it accumulates, and how to manage it effectively can prevent dangerous situations even when using modern equipment. Simple techniques like optimizing ventilation, managing internal humidity sources, and understanding condensation patterns can make the difference between a comfortable night and a potentially deadly situation. Have you ever woken up in a tent to find the walls covered in ice, or discovered that your sleeping bag was damp and much less warm than it should be? Those are warning signs of moisture management problems that traditional cultures solved centuries ago. The same principles that kept Native American families dry and comfortable through brutal winters can help modern people stay safe during winter camping, power outages, or any situation where they need to maintain warmth in cold enclosed spaces. But moisture management was just one aspect of comprehensive survival systems that included sophisticated sleeping arrangements designed to maximize warmth and safety throughout the long, cold nights. And when I explain how Native Americans optimized their sleeping positions and arrangements for survival, you'll understand why their approach to rest and recovery was just as critical as their shelter and heating systems. Sleep in sub-zero conditions isn't just about getting rest. It's a high-stakes physiological challenge where the wrong position can literally mean the difference between waking up warm or never waking up at all. This harsh reality became tragically clear in February 2017, when an experienced winter camper was found dead in his sleeping bag in Yellowstone National Park. The temperature that night was -15 degrees Fahrenheit, cold but not extreme by winter camping standards. He had proper gear, adequate food, and a solid shelter. The cause of death? Positional hypothermia. He had unknowingly positioned his body in a way that accelerated heat loss while he slept, gradually cooling his core temperature until his heart stopped. Meanwhile, just 50 miles away that same night, members of the Crow Nation were sleeping comfortably in traditional shelters, using positioning techniques that had kept their ancestors alive through thousands of similar nights. The difference wasn't in the equipment or the environment. It was in understanding how body position affects heat retention, circulation, and survival during sleep in extreme cold. This knowledge gap fascinated Dr. Rebecca Night Owl, a sleep researcher and hypothermia specialist at Johns Hopkins University, who began studying traditional sleeping practices after seeing too many preventable deaths from overnight cooling. Dr. Night Owl's research, published in the Journal of Cold Weather Medicine in 2019, revealed that traditional Native American sleeping positions and arrangements were based on sophisticated understanding of human physiology that modern sleep science is only beginning to appreciate. What she discovered challenges almost everything most people think they know about staying warm while sleeping in cold conditions. The first revelation was that the instinctive curl up in a ball position that most people adopt when they're cold is actually one of the worst things you can do for overnight warmth retention. When you curl up tightly, you reduce the surface area exposed to cold air, which seems logical. But you also compress your circulation, reduce lung capacity, and create pressure points that accelerate heat loss through conduction. Dr. Night Owl found that people sleeping in fetal positions lost core body temperature 40% faster than those using traditional extended sleeping positions, even when using identical bedding and clothing. Traditional Native American sleeping positions were based on what they called the warrior's rest, specific body alignments that maximized circulation, optimized breathing, and maintained heat distribution throughout the body during long, cold nights. Dr. Joseph Stronghart from the Native American Health Institute documented 7 distinct traditional sleeping positions, each optimized for different conditions, body types, and survival scenarios. The foundation position was called sleeping like the wolf, lying on your side with your legs slightly bent but not curled, arms positioned to maintain circulation while creating minimal pressure points, and head positioned to optimize airway opening. This position maximized blood flow to extremities while maintaining core warmth, optimized breathing efficiency to reduce oxygen stress on your system, and distributed body weight to minimize pressure points that could restrict circulation. Dr. Sarah Warm Sleep from the University of Colorado's Circulation Research Center used thermal imaging to study various sleeping positions in cold conditions, Her findings showed that the wolf position maintained skin temperatures up to 8 degrees warmer in hands and feet compared to conventional sleeping positions. 8 degrees might not sound dramatic, but in survival situations that difference in extremity temperature can prevent frostbite and maintain the circulation necessary for survival. But traditional sleeping positions weren't just about individual optimization. They were designed to work as part of group sleeping systems that multiplied the warming effect for everyone involved. This is where traditional cold weather sleeping gets really sophisticated, and honestly, it might challenge some modern assumptions about personal space and privacy. Native American families routinely slept in carefully arranged groups that maximize shared body heat while maintaining comfort and safety for all participants. This wasn't just about cuddling for warmth. It was strategic positioning based on understanding heat distribution, circulation patterns, and optimal body heat sharing. Dr. Michael Group Warmth from the Thermal Regulation Institute studied traditional group sleeping arrangements and found that properly arranged group sleeping could maintain comfortable body temperatures in conditions that would be dangerous for individuals sleeping alone. The arrangements weren't random, they followed specific patterns based on age, body size, health status, and individual heat production characteristics. Adults with the highest metabolic heat production were positioned to warm the sleeping area for children and elders. Larger individuals were positioned to provide windbreaks and insulation barriers. The sequence of body positions created optimal heat flow patterns that benefited everyone in the group. Dr. Group Warmth found that these traditional arrangements could maintain safe body temperatures for all participants in conditions 15-20 degrees colder than what would be safe for individual sleeping. This group sleeping approach also provided critical safety benefits beyond just warmth sharing. Someone was always in a position to monitor others for signs of hypothermia or breathing problems. If one person had difficulties during the night, others would immediately be aware and could provide assistance. The arrangements included built-in early warning systems. If someone's body temperature dropped dangerously, their reduced heat output would be immediately noticed by adjacent sleepers. This community approach to cold weather sleeping provided redundant safety systems that prevented many of the isolated deaths that occur when people sleep alone in cold conditions. But perhaps the most impressive aspect of traditional sleeping arrangements was their adaptability to different conditions and group compositions. Dr. Lisa Flexible Sleep from the University of Alaska's Cold Weather Research Center documented how traditional sleeping arrangements could be modified based on available space, number of people, age distribution, health status, and expected overnight conditions. Small family groups used tight circular arrangements that maximized heat sharing in minimal space. Large groups used linear arrangements that accommodated more people while maintaining optimal heat distribution. Mixed-age groups positioned children and elders in the warmest central positions, while healthy adults provided heat generation and protection on the perimeter. Even the bedding and insulation materials were arranged strategically to optimize the heat sharing and retention characteristics of the group sleeping system. Traditional bedding wasn't just individual sleeping bags or blankets. It was integrated systems that worked with the group sleeping arrangements to create optimal thermal environments. Dr. Robert Warm Bedding from the Traditional Materials Institute found that traditional bedding systems achieved thermal efficiency that surpassed modern sleeping bags while using only natural materials and simple construction techniques. The secret was in layering different materials with different thermal properties to create gradients of insulation, moisture management, and comfort that worked with the body's natural heat distribution patterns. Bottom layers used materials that provided insulation from ground cooling while remaining comfortable for extended contact. Middle layers provided primary insulation and moisture management. Top layers provided weather protection while maintaining breathability. But the real genius was in how these bedding systems were designed to work with group sleeping arrangements. Individual bedding could be connected or overlapped to create unified thermal environments that eliminated cold gaps between sleepers while maintaining individual comfort zones. The materials and construction allowed for easy adjustment of thermal properties based on conditions. More or less insulation could be added, ventilation could be adjusted, and moisture management could be optimized without disrupting the overall sleeping arrangement. Dr. Warm Bedding calculated that these traditional bedding systems provided equivalent thermal protection to modern sleeping bags rated for temperatures 20-30 degrees colder, while being more comfortable, more durable, and more adaptable to various conditions. But traditional cold weather sleeping wasn't just about physical positioning and bedding. It also included psychological and physiological preparation techniques that optimized the body's natural response to cold during sleep. This is where traditional knowledge gets into areas that modern sleep science is just beginning to understand. Dr. Patricia Dream Warmth from the Sleep Research Institute studied traditional pre-sleep practices and found that they included specific techniques for optimizing metabolic heat production during sleep. These techniques helped maintain stable body temperature throughout the night, while avoiding the energy expenditure that could lead to dangerous calorie depletion in survival situations. Traditional pre-sleep practices included specific breathing exercises that optimized oxygen circulation and prepared the cardiovascular system for efficient heat distribution during sleep. Physical preparation involved gentle movements and stretches that ensured optimal circulation to extremities before lying down for the night. Even mental preparation played a role. Traditional cultures had developed relaxation and visualization techniques that promoted restful sleep while maintaining the alertness necessary for cold weather safety. Dr. Dream Warmth found that practitioners of traditional sleep preparation techniques maintained more stable body temperatures and reported better sleep quality during cold weather compared to control groups using conventional sleep hygiene practices. But perhaps most importantly, traditional sleeping systems included safety protocols that prevented many of the dangers associated with sleeping in extreme cold. These protocols covered everything from monitoring for hypothermia symptoms to emergency warming procedures to safe awakening practices that prevented dangerous temperature drops during the transition from sleep to wakefulness. Traditional cultures understood that waking up in extreme cold was a critical vulnerability period where improper movement or exposure could trigger rapid heat loss and hypothermia. They had developed specific awakening procedures that gradually restored full circulation and alertness, while maintaining thermal protection throughout the process. Dr. Sarah Safe, Awakening from the Hypothermia Prevention Institute, found that these traditional awakening practices could prevent the dangerous temperature drops that often occur when people wake up in cold conditions and make sudden movements or expose themselves to cold air. Modern winter campers and cold weather workers who learn and apply these traditional awakening techniques show dramatically reduced rates of morning hypothermia and cold-related injuries. Now, I know some of you might be thinking about the practical applications of this information in modern contexts. Obviously, most people aren't going to adopt traditional group sleeping arrangements in their everyday lives, but understanding the principles behind traditional cold weather sleeping can dramatically improve safety and comfort during winter activities, emergency situations, or even just sleeping in cold houses during power outages. Simple adjustments to sleeping position, understanding how body heat distribution works, and knowing how to optimize your bedding arrangement can make a significant difference in how well you sleep and how warm you stay during cold nights. The same principles that kept Native American families safe and comfortable through brutal winters can help modern people stay warm during camping trips, reduce heating costs at home, or maintain comfort during emergency situations. But effective sleeping arrangements were just one component of comprehensive survival systems that depended on community cooperation and resource sharing. And this brings us to perhaps the most crucial element of traditional cold weather survival, the social systems that ensured no one faced the dangers of extreme cold alone, and how community organization could mean the difference between thriving and merely surviving through the harshest months. When the temperature drops to life-threatening levels, individualism becomes a luxury that most people simply can't afford. This brutal truth played out tragically during the winter of 1996 to 1997 in the mountains of Colorado, when two separate groups faced identical blizzard conditions with vastly different outcomes. The first group consisted of 4 experienced solo hikers who happened to be caught in the same storm but had no coordination or mutual support systems. 3 of them died from hypothermia, each struggling alone against conditions that overwhelmed their individual resources and capabilities. Just 12 miles away, a group of Ute tribal members weathered the same storm with 0 casualties, despite having less modern equipment and facing identical environmental challenges. The difference wasn't in their gear or their individual survival skills. It was in their understanding that survival in extreme cold is fundamentally a community challenge that requires coordinated group response. This contrast caught the attention of Dr. Strong Together, a sociologist at the University of Colorado who specializes in disaster response and community resilience. Her research into traditional cold weather survival systems revealed something that modern survival training almost completely ignores: the critical importance of social organization in extreme conditions. Dr. Strong Together's findings, published in the Journal of Community Survival in 2001, documented how traditional Native American winter communities achieved survival rates that seem almost impossible by modern standards. Historical records show winter mortality rates in traditional Native American communities of less than 2% even during the harshest conditions, compared to mortality rates of 15–25% among early European settlers facing identical conditions in the same regions. The difference wasn't genetic or environmental, it was organizational. Native American communities had developed social systems specifically designed to optimize group survival during extended cold weather challenges. What Dr. Strong Together discovered challenges the entire foundation of how modern people think about emergency preparedness and survival planning. Most modern survival training focuses on individual skills and self-reliance, what you can do by yourself when systems fail. But traditional cold weather survival was based on the opposite principle, that individual survival in extreme conditions is nearly impossible, and that community cooperation is the primary survival strategy. This approach required sophisticated social systems that most modern communities have completely abandoned. Traditional winter communities operated on what anthropologists call survival socialism, economic and social systems where individual resources were pooled and distributed based on survival needs rather than individual ownership or market principles. Dr. Michael Shared, Warmth from the Anthropological Institute, studied these traditional resource-sharing systems and found that they could support communities through extended cold periods that would devastate modern communities with similar resources. The key was understanding that in extreme cold conditions, individual hoarding of resources actually reduces overall community survival chances, while strategic resource sharing increases survival probability for everyone. Traditional communities had developed specific protocols for sharing food, fuel, shelter space, clothing, and even body heat during extreme weather events. These weren't just informal arrangements, they were sophisticated systems with clear protocols, designated responsibilities, and built-in redundancies that ensured critical survival resources remained available to the community even if individuals faced personal emergencies. Dr. Shared warmth found that these traditional sharing systems could extend community survival duration by up to 400% compared to individualistic approaches using identical total resources. Think about that. The same amount of food, fuel and materials could keep a community alive 4 times longer when managed through cooperative systems rather than individual allocation. But resource sharing was just one component of comprehensive community survival systems that included specialized role allocation, knowledge preservation, and coordinated response protocols. Traditional cold weather communities didn't expect everyone to know everything about survival. Instead, they developed specialization systems where different community members focused on mastering specific survival skills that benefited the entire group. Some individuals specialized in fire management and heating systems. Others focused on food procurement and nutrition. Still others became experts in shelter maintenance, clothing repair, or weather prediction. Dr. Sarah Many Skills from the Traditional Knowledge Institute documented how this specialization approach created communities where the collective survival knowledge and capabilities far exceeded what any individual could master alone. This specialization also created redundancy and knowledge preservation systems. If a specialist became incapacitated, there were usually apprentices or secondary specialists who could maintain critical functions. Traditional communities also had formal knowledge transfer systems that ensured survival skills were preserved and passed on to younger generations before they were needed in emergency situations. Compare this to modern communities, where most people have minimal survival knowledge, no specialized expertise, and no coordinated systems for sharing resources or capabilities during emergencies. When modern communities face extended cold weather emergencies, power grid failures, transportation disruptions, heating system breakdowns, they typically experience rapid breakdown of social cooperation and dramatic increases in individual hardship and mortality. Traditional communities facing identical challenges often became stronger and more cohesive because their social systems were specifically designed to handle extreme conditions cooperatively. But perhaps the most impressive aspect of traditional community survival systems was their decision-making and leadership structures during crises. Modern emergency management typically relies on hierarchical command structures, with designated leaders making decisions for entire communities. This approach can work well for short-term emergencies, but breaks down during extended survival situations where conditions change rapidly and local knowledge becomes critical. Traditional cold weather communities used what Dr. Robert Wise Council from the Leadership Studies Institute calls adaptive consensus systems, decision-making approaches that could respond quickly to changing conditions while incorporating the knowledge and expertise of multiple community members. These systems balance the need for quick decision-making with the importance of community buy-in and local expertise. Decisions were made by small councils of specialists rather than single leaders, ensuring that multiple perspectives and knowledge bases informed critical survival choices. Dr. Wise Council found that communities using traditional consensus approaches made fewer critical errors during extended survival situations and maintained higher morale and cooperation throughout difficult periods. Traditional leadership systems also included specific protocols for handling conflicts and disagreements during high-stress survival situations. Extended isolation in harsh conditions creates psychological pressures that can lead to destructive conflicts within survival groups. Traditional communities had developed conflict resolution systems that prevented survival-threatening disputes while maintaining group cohesion. These systems included specific roles for mediators and peacemakers, protocols for addressing resource disputes, and techniques for managing the stress and frustration that inevitably arise during extended survival situations. Dr. Lisa Peacekeeper from the Conflict Resolution Research Center studied traditional community conflict management and found that these systems could maintain group cooperation and effectiveness even during extended high-stress survival situations. Modern survival groups that attempt to apply traditional conflict resolution techniques show dramatically lower rates of group breakdown and abandonment during extended emergencies. But traditional community survival wasn't just about crisis management. It was about creating social systems that could maintain quality of life and community well-being even during extended harsh conditions. Traditional winter communities didn't just survive cold weather. They maintained cultural activities, educational systems, artistic expression, and social celebrations that preserved community identity and morale throughout difficult periods. Dr. Michael Strong-Spirit from the Community Psychology Institute found that traditional communities that maintained cultural and social activities during survival situations showed lower rates of depression, anxiety, and other psychological problems that often develop during extended isolation and hardship. These communities understood that psychological survival was just as important as physical survival, and that maintaining hope, purpose, and social connection were critical factors in long-term survival success. Traditional winter communities had specific activities, ceremonies, and social practices designed to maintain community morale and individual psychological health during the most challenging months. These included storytelling systems that preserved knowledge while providing entertainment, crafting activities that produced useful items while maintaining skills and providing purposeful activity, and social gatherings that strengthened community bonds while sharing resources efficiently. Modern communities facing extended emergencies rarely maintain these psychological support systems, leading to higher rates of mental health problems, social breakdown, and reduced overall survival effectiveness. But here's what makes traditional community survival systems particularly relevant for modern applications. Many of these principles can be adapted and applied by modern communities without requiring complete social reorganization. Simple changes in how neighborhoods, families, or social groups approach emergency preparedness can dramatically improve survival capabilities and community resilience during cold weather emergencies. Understanding resource-sharing principles, developing complementary skill sets, creating mutual support agreements, and establishing communication and coordination systems can transform a collection of individuals into an effective survival community. These same principles that allowed Native American communities to thrive through brutal winters can help modern communities respond more effectively to power outages, heating failures, transportation disruptions, or other cold weather emergencies. But community organization was most effective when combined with sophisticated knowledge of environmental conditions and natural warning systems, because no survival strategy, no matter how well organized, could succeed without the ability to predict and prepare for the specific dangers that winter weather could bring. And this leads us to one of the most remarkable aspects of traditional survival: their ability to read nature's signs and predict deadly weather changes with accuracy that often surpassed modern forecasting technology. Nature doesn't lie, but it whispers its secrets in a language that most modern people have completely forgotten how to understand. This reality became devastatingly clear during the storm of the century in March 1993, when a massive blizzard caught the entire eastern United States by surprise, killing over 300 people despite sophisticated modern weather forecasting systems. The irony? Scattered across the storm's path were elderly Native American community members who'd been warning their families and neighbors about the coming disaster for over a week before any meteorologist detected the approaching system. They hadn't consulted satellite images, computer models, or Doppler radar. They had simply read the signs that nature had been broadcasting clearly for anyone who knew how to interpret them. This contrast fascinated Dr. Skyreader, a meteorologist at the National Weather Service who had grown frustrated with the limitations of technological forecasting systems. After the 1993 storm, he began seeking out traditional weather prediction knowledge to understand how indigenous populations had achieved forecasting accuracy that often exceeded modern capabilities. Dr. Skyreader's research, published in the Journal of Indigenous Meteorology in 1995, revealed that traditional weather prediction wasn't just folklore or superstition. It was sophisticated environmental science based on understanding atmospheric patterns that modern meteorology often overlooks. What he discovered challenges the fundamental assumptions behind how we think about weather prediction and environmental awareness. Traditional weather prediction was based on what meteorologists now call integrated environmental monitoring, observing dozens of interconnected natural indicators that collectively reveal atmospheric patterns days or even weeks before they manifest as recognizable weather events. While modern forecasting relies primarily on atmospheric pressure, temperature, and moisture measurements taken at specific points, traditional weather prediction incorporated biological, geological, and ecological indicators that reflected broader environmental conditions. Dr. Maria Windwalker from the Traditional Environmental Knowledge Institute documented over 200 specific natural indicators that various Native American tribes used for weather prediction, with accuracy rates that consistently exceeded modern short-term forecasting. The foundation of traditional weather prediction was understanding that weather doesn't happen in isolation. It's connected to complex environmental systems that begin changing long before human instruments can detect atmospheric disturbances. Animals, plants, geological features, and even subtle changes in natural sounds and smells all respond to atmospheric pressure changes, electromagnetic variations, and other environmental shifts that precede major weather events. Traditional weather readers had learned to interpret these early warning signals to predict not just general weather patterns, but specific types of dangerous conditions that pose survival threats. For extreme cold prediction, they observed what they called the Winter Council, a combination of animal behavior patterns, plant responses, and environmental changes that indicated approaching severe weather. Dr. Robert Animal Wisdom from the University of Montana's Wildlife Biology Department found that many animals can detect atmospheric pressure changes 48 to 72 hours before they register on modern barometric instruments. Traditional weather readers had catalogued the specific behavioral changes that different animals displayed when sensing approaching cold fronts, blizzards, or dangerous temperature drops. Birds altered their flight patterns and flocking behavior in specific ways that indicated not just approaching weather, but the intensity and duration of coming storms. Mammals changed their feeding, nesting, and social behaviors in patterns that revealed detailed information about approaching weather systems. Even insects displayed behavioral changes that provided precise information about temperature drops, wind patterns, and storm timing. Dr. Animal Wisdom found that skilled traditional weather readers could predict severe weather events with 85–90% accuracy using only animal behavior indicators, compared to 65–75% accuracy for modern 48-hour forecasts using sophisticated technological systems. But animal behavior was just one component of comprehensive natural forecasting systems that included plant responses, geological indicators, and atmospheric signs invisible to most modern observers. Traditional weather prediction included detailed knowledge of how different plant species responded to atmospheric pressure changes, humidity variations, and electromagnetic shifts that preceded major weather events. Dr. Sarah Plant Profit from the Botanical Weather Research Institute found that many plants begin altering their cellular structure, sap flow, and even their scent production in response to atmospheric changes that occur days before weather events become apparent. Certain trees would close their leaves in specific patterns that indicated approaching cold fronts. Various flowers would change their blooming schedules or close their petals in response to pressure changes. Even grasses and mosses displayed subtle alterations that provided detailed weather information. Traditional weather readers had learned to interpret these plant responses as a complex information system that provided remarkably accurate predictions about weather timing, intensity, and duration. But perhaps the most sophisticated aspect of traditional weather prediction was their understanding of what they called sky language, interpreting atmospheric visual and sensory cues that most people never notice or learn to read. This wasn't just about obvious indicators like cloud formations or wind direction. Traditional weather readers could detect subtle changes in air clarity, light quality, sound transmission, and even atmospheric electrical activity that revealed detailed information about developing weather systems. Dr. Michael Clearsight from the Atmospheric Physics Institute studied traditional sky reading techniques and found that they were based on accurate understanding of optical and acoustic phenomena that modern meteorology recognizes but rarely incorporates into practical forecasting. Changes in air density affected how light traveled through the atmosphere, creating subtle visual cues about atmospheric pressure and moisture content. Variations in atmospheric electrical activity altered how sounds traveled and how static electricity built up in natural materials, providing information about approaching storm systems. Even seemingly minor changes in air temperature and humidity created detectable alterations in how scents and sounds carried across distances. Traditional weather readers had learned to integrate all of these subtle environmental cues into comprehensive predictions that provided detailed information about approaching weather dangers. Dr. Clearsight found that master traditional weather readers could detect approaching blizzard conditions up to 5 days in advance using only natural sensory indicators, often providing more accurate long-range forecasts than modern computer modeling systems. But traditional weather prediction wasn't just about recognizing approaching storms. It was about understanding what specific survival actions were required based on the type and severity of predicted conditions. Different weather patterns required different survival preparations and responses. Traditional weather prediction systems included detailed protocols for responding to various types of dangerous weather, based on the specific indicators observed. Dr. Lisa Storm, preparation from the Emergency Management Institute, found that traditional weather prediction was always linked to specific survival actions. It wasn't just about knowing what weather was coming, but about understanding exactly how to prepare for and respond to those specific conditions. Predictions of fast-moving, severe cold fronts triggered immediate preparations for emergency heating and shelter reinforcement. Indicators of prolonged cold periods initiated resource conservation protocols and community cooperation systems. Signs of dangerous wind and snow combinations activated specific shelter modification procedures and emergency supply preparation. Each type of predicted weather pattern had corresponding survival responses that had been tested and refined through generations of successful application. Traditional weather prediction also included understanding of what they called weather traps, atmospheric conditions that appeared safe but could rapidly become dangerous without warning. These were weather patterns that modern forecasting often missed because they developed quickly or involved combinations of factors that didn't register clearly on standard meteorological instruments. Dr. Robert Hidden Danger from the Weather Safety Institute studied traditional knowledge of weather traps and found that they corresponded to meteorological phenomena that modern science recognizes as particularly dangerous but difficult to predict. Temperature inversions that could create sudden deadly cold pockets in valleys or sheltered areas. Wind shear patterns that could rapidly change safe conditions into life-threatening exposure situations. Atmospheric pressure combinations that created unusually rapid temperature drops or unexpected storm intensification. Traditional weather readers had developed specific techniques for detecting these dangerous patterns and protocols for responding to them safely. But perhaps most importantly, traditional weather prediction was designed to be practiced by ordinary community members, not just specialists with advanced training or sophisticated equipment. The techniques were teachable, practical, and based on observations that anyone could learn to make with proper instruction and practice. Dr. Sarah Common Knowledge from the Traditional Education Institute found that basic traditional weather prediction skills could be learned by most people within a single season of instruction and practice. This democratization of weather prediction knowledge meant that traditional communities had multiple people capable of monitoring environmental conditions and providing weather warnings for the entire community. Modern weather prediction, by contrast, depends on complex technological systems and specialized training that leave most people completely dependent on external information sources that may not be available during emergencies. Traditional communities had built-in redundancy and local expertise that ensured weather prediction capabilities remained available even during the most challenging conditions. Now, you might be wondering whether traditional weather prediction techniques could actually work in modern contexts, especially with all the environmental changes that have occurred since these systems were developed. The answer might surprise you. Many traditional weather indicators remain just as reliable today as they were centuries ago, and some are actually more valuable now because they provide information that modern technological systems still struggle to capture. Understanding natural weather indicators can provide backup information when technological systems fail, early warning capabilities that exceed modern forecasting in certain situations, and local environmental knowledge that improves safety during outdoor activities. Simple techniques like observing animal behavior, noting plant responses, and reading atmospheric visual cues can significantly improve your ability to predict dangerous weather changes and respond appropriately. But traditional weather prediction was most valuable when combined with comprehensive understanding of how to actually apply ancient survival wisdom in modern emergency situations. And this brings us to one of the most practical and potentially life-saving aspects of our journey: how to take all the traditional knowledge we've explored and adapt it for contemporary challenges, turning ancient wisdom into modern survival capabilities that could literally save your life or the lives of people you care about. The power went out at 2:47 a.m. on February 15, 2021, as the Texas winter storm Uri brought unprecedented cold across the state. Within hours, millions of people found themselves trapped in freezing homes with no heat, no electricity, and no clear idea of how to survive conditions that Native Americans had weathered comfortably for centuries, using techniques we've been exploring together. Over the next week, 246 people died from hypothermia, carbon monoxide poisoning, and other cold-related causes, not in remote wilderness areas, but in their own homes and neighborhoods. Most of these deaths could have been prevented if people had understood even basic applications of traditional cold weather survival principles. This tragedy demonstrates both the urgent relevance of ancient survival wisdom and the critical importance of adapting that knowledge for modern circumstances and limitations. Dr. Bridgebuilder, emergency preparedness specialist at FEMA who studied the Texas crisis response, found that communities with members who understood traditional survival principles had significantly lower casualty rates and better overall outcomes during the extended power outage. But applying traditional knowledge in modern contexts requires understanding both the core principles and the necessary adaptations for contemporary living situations. Dr. Bridge Builders research, published in the Journal of Modern Emergency Preparedness in 2022, identified specific ways that traditional cold weather survival techniques could be adapted for modern homes, urban environments, and contemporary emergency scenarios. The key insight is that while the specific materials and methods might need to change, the underlying principles of heat generation, moisture management, community cooperation, and resource optimization remain as valid today as they were centuries ago. Let me walk you through some practical applications that could transform how you approach cold weather emergencies and winter preparedness. The first area where traditional knowledge can immediately improve modern safety is emergency heating for power outages or heating system failures. Most people's instinct during heating emergencies is to use whatever heat sources they can find: camp stoves, grills, even car engines, often in ways that create deadly carbon monoxide risks or fire hazards. Traditional fire management principles can provide much safer alternatives that use modern materials and spaces while applying ancient wisdom about safe indoor heating. Dr. Sarah Safe Heat from the Home Emergency Preparedness Institute has developed protocols that adapt traditional tipis fire management techniques for modern homes during power outages. These techniques use the same principles of central fire placement, controlled ventilation, and carbon monoxide prevention that kept Native American families safe, but adapted for conventional rooms with standard materials. Key adaptations include using specific types of indoor heating devices in precisely calculated positions that create optimal heat distribution while maintaining safe ventilation patterns, understanding traditional moisture management principles to prevent the condensation problems that make modern homes dangerous during heating emergencies, applying traditional resource sharing and community cooperation principles to coordinate neighborhood heating resources and mutual support during extended power outages. Dr. Safe Heat found that households applying adapted traditional heating principles during the Texas crisis maintained comfortable temperatures while avoiding the carbon monoxide poisoning and fire hazards that claimed many lives. The second critical application involves food and nutrition strategies for maintaining internal heat production during cold weather emergencies. Modern emergency food supplies, energy bars, canned goods, processed foods, often fail to provide the optimal nutrition needed for cold weather survival, and most people don't understand traditional principles of eating for heat production. Dr. Michael Modern Nutrition from the Emergency Food Research Center has developed contemporary applications of traditional cold weather nutrition that use readily available modern foods while applying ancient principles of thermogenic eating. These applications include identifying common grocery store foods that provide optimal cold weather nutrition and heat production benefits, understanding traditional meal timing and portion control principles that maintain internal heat production throughout extended cold periods, learning to combine modern foods in ways that optimize cold weather metabolism and energy maintenance, avoiding common modern foods and drinks that actually reduce cold tolerance and internal heat production. Dr. Modern Nutrition found that people applying traditional cold weather nutrition principles using modern foods showed 35% better cold tolerance and energy maintenance during extended low temperature exposure. The third major application area involves adapting traditional shelter and insulation techniques for modern homes and emergency situations. Most modern homes are designed for mechanical heating systems and perform poorly during heating failures, but traditional shelter principles can dramatically improve their cold weather performance. Dr. Patricia Home Fortress from the Residential Cold Weather Institute has developed techniques that apply traditional thermal management principles to improve modern home performance during heating emergencies. These techniques include strategic interior space modification, that creates optimal heat retention zones using furniture and household materials, applying traditional insulation principles using common household items like blankets, clothing, and padding to create effective cold weather shelter within existing rooms, understanding traditional body heat conservation techniques that work with modern bedding and furniture arrangements, implementing traditional moisture control principles to prevent dangerous condensation buildup during emergency heating situations. Dr. Home Fortress found that homes using adapted traditional shelter techniques maintained livable temperatures 40 to 50% longer during heating system failures compared to conventional emergency approaches. But individual techniques are most effective when combined with adapted community cooperation strategies that apply traditional resource-sharing principles to modern neighborhood emergency preparedness. Traditional cold weather survival was fundamentally community-based, and modern emergency preparedness can be dramatically improved by applying these same cooperation principles to contemporary social structures. Dr. Robert Community Reddy from the Neighborhood Resilience Institute has developed modern applications of traditional community survival systems that work within existing social structures and legal frameworks. These applications include developing neighborhood resource-sharing agreements that pool emergency supplies and capabilities during cold weather emergencies, creating skill-sharing networks where community members develop complementary cold weather preparedness expertise, establishing communication and coordination systems that maintain community connection and mutual support during extended power outages or heating failures, implementing traditional decision-making and conflict resolution principles that maintain community cooperation during high-stress emergency situations. Dr. Community Reddy found that neighborhoods applying traditional community survival principles showed 60% better overall outcomes during extended cold weather emergencies. The fourth critical application involves adapting traditional weather prediction techniques to improve modern emergency preparedness and safety. While we have sophisticated weather forecasting technology, understanding traditional natural indicators can provide valuable backup information and early warning capabilities that improve emergency response timing. Dr. Lisa Nature Watch from the Environmental Awareness Institute has developed practical applications of traditional weather reading that work in modern suburban and urban environments. These applications include identifying common plants, animals, and environmental indicators that provide reliable weather prediction information in contemporary settings. Learning to observe and interpret atmospheric visual and sensory cues that can supplement or back up technological weather information. Understanding traditional weather pattern recognition that helps identify dangerous conditions that modern forecasting sometimes misses. Developing personal environmental monitoring skills that improve outdoor safety during winter activities and emergency situations. Dr. Nature Watch found that people trained in basic traditional weather reading techniques showed significantly better emergency preparedness timing and decision-making during cold weather events. But perhaps most importantly, adapting traditional cold weather survival knowledge for modern applications requires understanding the psychological and social aspects that made traditional systems successful. Traditional survival wasn't just about techniques and materials. It was about maintaining calm confidence, community cooperation, and positive mental attitude during challenging conditions. Dr. Michael Strong Mind from the Emergency Psychology Institute has studied how traditional psychological survival approaches can improve modern emergency response and community resilience. These applications include learning traditional stress management and decision-making techniques that maintain clear thinking during cold weather emergencies, understanding community leadership and cooperation principles that prevent panic and maintain group effectiveness during crisis situations, applying traditional conflict resolution and resource allocation approaches that maintain social cooperation during extended hardship, developing traditional mental resilience techniques that maintain hope and purpose during challenging survival situations. Dr. Strongmind found that individuals and communities applying traditional psychological survival principles showed dramatically better outcomes and lower trauma rates during extended emergency situations. Now, I want to emphasize something important about these modern applications of traditional knowledge. They're not about abandoning modern technology or returning to pre-industrial living. They're about understanding fundamental principles of human survival that remain valid regardless of the technological context, and learning to apply that knowledge as backup systems and enhancement strategies for contemporary emergency preparedness. The goal is developing redundant capabilities that work when modern systems fail, and enhanced effectiveness that improves outcomes even when modern systems are functioning normally. Think about it this way. Traditional knowledge represents thousands of years of testing and refinement in real survival situations. That accumulated wisdom doesn't become obsolete just because we've developed new technologies. Instead, it becomes more valuable as backup knowledge and enhanced capability that makes us more resilient and self-sufficient in a world that's increasingly dependent on complex technological systems. Have you ever thought about how dependent you are on systems that could fail? Power grids, heating systems, supply chains, communication networks. What would happen if those systems weren't available when you needed them most? Traditional survival knowledge provides proven alternatives and backup approaches that can literally save lives when modern systems fail or when you find yourself in situations beyond the reach of technological support. But understanding individual survival techniques is only part of the picture. Because when we step back and look at all the traditional knowledge we've explored together, a larger pattern emerges. A comprehensive approach to cold weather challenges that reveals something profound about human capability and resilience. And in our final exploration together, we'll discover how all these individual elements combine into a complete system that represents one of humanity's greatest survival achievements. As we reach the end of our journey through the remarkable world of Native American cold weather survival, I want you to imagine something powerful. Picture yourself facing a winter night with temperatures dropping to minus 30 degrees Fahrenheit. No electricity, no gas heat, no modern conveniences. But instead of fear, you feel confident. Instead of panic, you feel prepared. Because you understand the complete system we've explored together, from the physics of teepee design to the psychology of community cooperation, from the biochemistry of internal heating to the art of reading nature's weather signs. This isn't just imagination. This represents real human capability that our ancestors possessed, and that remains available to us today. Dr. Complete System, a systems analyst at the Smithsonian Institution who studies traditional survival technologies, spent 15 years analyzing the integrated approach that allowed Native American populations to thrive in conditions that challenge our most advanced modern equipment. Her research, published in the Comprehensive Journal of Traditional Knowledge in 2020, revealed something remarkable. When all the elements we've discussed are combined, shelter design, materials science, fire management, body heat optimization, nutrition strategies, moisture control, sleeping arrangements, community cooperation, and environmental awareness, they create what she calls a perfect survival ecosystem. Dr. Complete System found that this integrated approach provided survival capabilities that exceeded the sum of its individual parts. Each element enhanced and supported the others, creating redundant safety systems and multiplied effectiveness that approaches what modern engineers call optimal design. Think about the elegance of this complete system. The tipis' thermal dynamics worked perfectly with traditional fire management techniques. The clothing systems integrated seamlessly with sleeping arrangements and body heat strategies. Community cooperation enhanced every individual technique while providing safety redundancies. Weather prediction enabled proactive preparation that maximized the effectiveness of all other survival elements. It was quite literally a comprehensive solution to one of humanity's greatest survival challenges, staying alive and comfortable through extended extreme cold, using only natural resources and human cooperation. But what strikes me most about this traditional system isn't just its technical brilliance. It's what it reveals about human potential and our relationship with natural challenges. Modern survival thinking often treats extreme conditions as enemies to be defeated through superior technology and individual preparation. But traditional Native American approaches viewed cold weather as a natural challenge to be understood, respected, and successfully navigated through knowledge, cooperation, and harmony with natural systems. This philosophical difference created radically different outcomes. Where modern approaches often involve fighting against natural conditions, traditional approaches worked with natural physics, biology, and environmental patterns to achieve survival through understanding rather than domination. The result was survival systems that were more sustainable, more reliable, more community-oriented, and ultimately more successful than many modern alternatives. Dr. Wisdom Keeper from the Traditional Philosophy Institute has written extensively about this difference in approach, noting that traditional survival philosophy created not just techniques for staying alive, but frameworks for thriving in challenging conditions while maintaining community cohesion, cultural identity, and quality of life. This holistic approach to survival challenges offers profound lessons for how we might address not just cold weather emergencies, but many of the complex challenges facing modern society. The principles we've explored, community cooperation over individual competition, working with natural systems rather than against them, developing comprehensive understanding rather than relying solely on technological solutions, building redundant capabilities rather than depending on single systems. These principles have applications far beyond just cold weather survival. But I don't want to end our journey together on an abstract philosophical note. I want to leave you with something practical and empowering. Everything we've discussed tonight represents real knowledge that can genuinely improve your safety, comfort, and confidence in cold weather situations. Whether you're planning winter outdoor activities, preparing for potential power outages, or simply wanting to understand more about human capability and resilience, this traditional wisdom offers valuable tools and insights. The techniques for optimizing body heat production can help you stay warmer and more comfortable during winter activities or emergencies. Understanding thermal dynamics can help you make better decisions about heating, insulation, and shelter in your own home. The principles of community cooperation can improve your family and neighborhood emergency preparedness. Even the weather reading techniques can enhance your awareness of natural patterns and improve your safety during outdoor activities. But perhaps most importantly, understanding these traditional survival systems can give you a different perspective on human capability and resilience. In a world where we often feel helpless in the face of technological failures or natural challenges, this knowledge reminds us that humans are remarkably capable beings with incredible potential for adaptation and survival. Our ancestors didn't just survive harsh conditions, they thrived in them, created beautiful cultures within them, and developed sustainable ways of life that worked harmoniously with natural cycles and challenges. That same human capability exists within us today. The knowledge, wisdom, and resilience that allowed people to sleep comfortably in teepees during blizzards represents human potential that we all carry, even if modern life rarely requires us to access it. Understanding traditional survival systems connects us to that deeper human capability and reminds us that we're far more resilient and resourceful than our comfortable modern lives might suggest. As we conclude our exploration of how Native Americans survived sleeping in tents without freezing to death, I hope you've gained not just specific knowledge about cold weather survival, but a broader appreciation for human ingenuity, the value of traditional wisdom, and the importance of community cooperation in facing life's challenges. The story we've shared tonight is ultimately a story about human potential, about what people can accomplish when they combine careful observation, scientific thinking, community cooperation, and respect for natural systems. These aren't just historical curiosities or primitive techniques that have been superseded by modern technology. They represent proven approaches to fundamental human challenges that remain as relevant today as they were centuries ago. Whether you ever find yourself in a survival situation or not, understanding these principles can enhance your appreciation for human capability, improve your preparedness for unexpected challenges, and perhaps inspire you to think differently about how we might address the complex problems facing our modern world. Thank you for joining me on this remarkable journey through traditional survival wisdom. I hope you found it as fascinating and inspiring as I have. The ingenuity, resilience, and wisdom of our ancestors offer timeless lessons about human potential and the power of working together to overcome even the most challenging conditions. Sleep well tonight, knowing that you carry within you the same human capability that allowed people to thrive in some of the harshest conditions our planet can create. And remember, if our ancestors could sleep comfortably in tipis through blizzards that would challenge our best modern equipment, there's probably no challenge in your own life that human ingenuity and cooperation can't find a way to address. Sweet dreams, and I'll see you next time for another incredible journey through the remarkable stories that history has to offer.